In this video, I will be reading from the work of Miles Mathis in his research paper titled Hitler's Genealogy, first published January 16, 2017. As usual, this is just my opinion arrived at by internet research anyone can do. I bet you don't think I can find any laughs in this one, but let me know at the end. Some people seem to think I am privy to inside information or to sources others can't see. I am not. I don't even have memberships to any of these genealogical sites. I refuse to spend money on this stuff, so I only go to free pages. That's why I give you links so that you can see what I saw. Everything I have found over the past 5 years is freely available on the internet, most of it at Wikipedia, Geni, Ancestry, Intellius, or other free mainstream sites. You may ask why they would leave this information up on the internet. I also ask myself that. My feeling is that, uncollated and unanalyzed, this information normally helps them sell their various agendas. It takes a lot of work to gather it all together, put it in order, and unspin it all. They figure no one is capable of doing that because no one before me did it. They think you would have to be a professional historian or some other top academic, and they figure they own all those people. Anyway, strap yourself in because here we go again. The ride has begun. Please keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times and do not stand up while the car is in motion. The mainstream is now admitting Hitler was at least partially Jewish. That is from History.com, and the data comes from DNA evidence. You will say, I don't trust History.com when they tell me things I don't agree with, so why do I trust them when they tell me this? I will tell you why. It isn't because I trust them on this question. Trust has nothing to do with it. It is because I can see that they are misdirecting even while admitting it. Notice that in the article they want you to think Hitler is only Jewish in a couple of lines, while being mostly Gentile. They are selling it as a minor irony, while not tying it to anything important. So they are spinning it heavily. This is what they do. We saw them do it with Lenin and many others. This indicates to me that Hitler was probably a lot more Jewish than they are admitting, but I am not taking their word for it either way. I am going to do my own research from the ground up as usual. I just take their spinning as a hint. So let's hit Geni.com. Hitler wasn't even really a Hitler. We are told the family was originally Heidler. So why did his father change it? Why move from Heidler to Hitler? We are told it was to move up in the Austrian civil service. By 1876, his father Alois Heidler, age 39, had topped out in rank at the border police and Austrian customs due to his limited education. To remedy this, he now did two things. One, he amended his baptismal record to indicate Johann Georg Heidler was his real father rather than his foster father. Previously, the slot for father had been left blank. This emendation requires 4 witnesses, but only 3 testified. We are told all 3 were illiterate family members and had been underage at the time of Alois's mother's death. Therefore, they shouldn't have been qualified to testify. 2. Alois changed his name to Hitler. We aren't told why this would have helped him move up in rank, and the event isn't even tied to the change in the baptismal record. However, since both events happened at the same time, we may assume they were both done for the same reason. What was that reason? Well, I assume the problem was that even after the baptismal record changed, Heidler still had a problem. The name sounded Jewish. Locally, it may have been known to be Jewish. In fact, I suspect the entire Frankenberger story has been inserted as misdirection. As you may know, the current worst-case scenario for Hitler's genealogy is that his real paternal grandfather was a Frankenberger, admitted to be Jewish. I suggest that isn't true, and that it has been inserted as a dead end. It looks to me like the Hiedlers were Jewish, and so was Maria Schicklgruber. But if you are looking at the Frankenbergers, you aren't looking at the Heidlers and Schicklgrubers. You may not understand why I think that, so I will just tell you. It is because I always assume that the two top-ranked stories on any subject are both false. That is what I've always found, so it is a logical assumption. On any web search, the truth will either be unlisted or it will be downlisted to oblivion. Since the Frankengruber story came up near the top of the first page, I assumed it was garbage, just like the mainstream story. Remember that the mainstream story and the alternative story are always both false. Since we will see name changes from all these people below, also pause to ask yourself this. If you are a Gentile, how many times has your family changed its name in the past century? In all my lines, I only found one small change. The Malloys dropped an L to become Malloy. So you should find it very suspicious that all these Nazis were constantly changing their names. But if they were normal people with nothing to hide, why would they do that? If history was really what we have been told, why are the famous people so well hidden? In support of my hunch, notice that Hitler's father's name is Alois. That doesn't sound very Austrian, does it? Looks French. Since he originally spelled it Aloys, A-L-O-Y-S, that seems even less Austrian. I send you to this wiki page to get a taste of the name Alois in history. A lot of Nazis there, but not a lot of old Austrian figures. In fact, this page is a gold mine, not only for this paper, but for the entire larger question. Notice that the Pope before the current one was Alois. Joseph Alois Ratzinger. Arnold Schwarzenegger's middle name is Alois. The mayor of St. Louis during the war was Alois Kaufman. Kaufman is of course a Jewish name, and Missouri has long been one of the most politically corrupt places in the US. That's where Truman came from, and the Pendergast and Hannigan and that bunch. Then we have the Alois Springer, also probably Jewish. He spoke Hebrew and was the principal of Delhi College, which was funded by the East India Company. Not surprisingly, it spawned several gurus who later came to the US and made trouble. Then we have Alois Haba, the Jewish composer from Prague. If that link doesn't convince you, try this one, where we learn that at the 1923 invitation of Leo Ketzenberg, Franz Schrecker and his entire class abandoned Vienna for Berlin. Haba was part of that class. Then we have Alois Buttinger, socialist and Jew. Also Alois Brunner, who I hit in my last paper on Spotlight. He is sold as a Nazi but appears to be Jewish. Alois Hudal, pro-Nazi bishop, is the same. Alois Adolf Ryle, philosopher and promoter of Nietzsche. We get a 2-for-1 with his names, don't we? Alois and Adolf. Ryle is also a Jewish name. See Regine Ryle, convicted in 1907 in Vienna of being a madam and admitted to be Jewish. Also see Nicholas Riehl, who worked on the bomb for the Soviets. Also see famous meteorologist Herbert Riehl, admitted to be Jewish. Then we find the famous Dr. Alois Altheimer, admitted to be Jewish. Then Alois Wash, previously Walsheimer, Jewish expressionist painter. Then we find the Czech writer Alois Jirasek, not admitted to be Jewish, but he was a reproducer of Jewish legends and teller of Prague's Jewish history. Then we have Alois Swoboda, son of Adolf, mail-order millionaire who promoted Charles Atlas in The Perfect Physique. Swoboda was promoted by Ernest and L. Ron Hubbard, who later used Swoboda's gimmickry in Scientology. I assume all were Jews, although I will have to hit it later. It would swamp this paper. In short, almost every Alois listed throws up some kind of Jewish red flag, so that from now on we can use the name as a probable marker. Rather than see it as a variation of Louis, as we are told, we can tag it as a variation of Israel, Zion, or Sion. In fact, Alois backwards is Siola, or Sion-la. In French, Zion there. And look at the picture of Alois Hitler they have posted at genie.com. You have to laugh, that guy has absolutely no resemblance to Adolf Hitler or anyone else in the family. Here is his other son, Alois Hitler Jr. Zero resemblance. That picture of Alois Sr. is a fake. They just grabbed a picture of the most criminal-looking person they could find from that period and posted it as Hitler's father. Don't believe me that we are being toyed with? Check out this on Alois Hitler Jr.'s page. He is listed like this in the title, Alois Hitler, Mautzelberger Jr. What? We appear to be being told that his mother's maiden name is Mautzelsberger. But that isn't the way it is usually given, so I see it as a clue. His mother is given as Franziska Mautzenberger, so they want to be sure you don't miss that. Why? Because it couldn't be more Jewish if it were Matzo-ball. Matzo. We learn nothing else about her with no parents listed. Why do they use that name? Because it is almost extinct. According to Namepedia, there are only 12 instances in the entire world. For comparison, Mathis brings up 786,000. Jones brings up 38 million. This indicates Mautzelberger is a fake name, used only by Intel for its jokes. Also curious to find Alois Hitler Jr.'s son listed as William Patrick Stewart Houston. His life is another big joke. On his Genie page, it is made to look like he took his mother's names, Stewart Houston, put in the biographical section at the bottom. It says he just made it up. Besides, his mother's maiden name is Dowling. We have seen that in previous papers as a variation of Downing, indicating this woman was actually in the peerage. Regardless, according to Wikipedia and other mainstream sources, her name wasn't Stewart Houston, so listing her as a Stewart Houston is a major problem. Or was it? Stewart is of course a prominent name in the peerage, so perhaps someone at Genie is giving us a hint here. To unwind it, we have to respell both names to get Stewart Houston. We then find Houston Stewart Nicholson, a friend of Boswell. His son was the 5th Baronet Greenock, and his grandson was Admiral of the Fleet 5-star Houston Stewart. His son was also Admiral William Houston Stewart, and he lived until 1901. Bridget Dowling was born around 1891, so we just need the final link. In searching on this, I found some interesting things which I will share. At thepeerage.com, there is a Doris Dowling, daughter of an unknown Dowling, and Doris came to the US to be an actress. She married Artie Shaw, the famous band leader, and Leonard B. Kaufman, producer of Hawaii Five-0. Why is she scrubbed? Is it connected to our mystery here? I suspect so. Anyway, it is hard to make that link between Stewart and Dowling due to scrubbing, but the Dowlings and Stewarts are very closely related, as you see here at Tim Dowling's lineage. As you may know, he has built his own genealogy website and it is huge. Anyway, he says that he is related to King James Stewart II, second cousin 18 times removed. That's an incredibly close relationship to someone so distant in time, as you can see by just scrolling up and down the rest of that page.
Do a page search for first and second, and you will find that the only other relationships that close but distant in time are a Bacon, 13 times removed, a Bowes, a Brandon, 16 times removed, a Bruce, 22 times removed, a Sucille, a Clifford, 14 times removed, a de Bourgogne, a de Castile, a Douglas, King Hardencanute, King Harold Harefoot, 33 times removed, 3 King Heinrichs, a Neville, 2 King Charles of France, King James V of Scotland, King John II of France, 2 King Charles of France, Henry V, VI, VII, and VIII of England, 3 Seymours, a Stafford, King James Stuart I, a Talbot, King Edward VI, and Queens Mary and Elizabeth.
Therefore, when we see Alois Hitler marrying a Dowling and then changing his name to Stewart, we should be very suspicious. The odds are very high that Bridget Dowling really was closely related to the Stewarts and that it was part of her name or the name of someone in her family. Obviously, they had to scrub all this because it means Hitler's brother married into the British peerage before World War I. Addendum, January 28, 2017. Also interesting is Houston Stewart Chamberlain, 1927, a British-born German philosopher with red flags all over him. He married Richard Wagner's daughter, Eva, after she divorced famous composer the Baron Hans van Bülow. Think of the later Claus von Bülow. Notice all the composers we see here. Hitler referenced Chamberlain, one of his favorite writers, often. Chamberlain's bio is very curious, since they call him German despite the fact that both his parents are said to be English/Scottish, and he was born in England. So why was he German? Are they giving us a clue? Chamberlain's father is given as Rear Admiral William Chamberlain, and his mother is Eliza Hall, of the Baronet's Hall from Douglas, Scotland. Her father was a captain in the Navy, and her grandmother was Helen Douglas of the Earls of Selkirk. So why was H.S. Chamberlain German? He studied under Karl Vaux in Geneva. Think of actor Jon Voight. And Julius von Weisner in Vienna. Odd. After his studies, he settled in Dresden and became a hater of Disraeli. This all looks staged as opposition control. Why would the son of two military families from the peerage settle in Dresden? Chamberlain later got involved in the Theosophy Project, importing bastardized Eastern religions to the West to create chaos. I will have to research Chamberlain more deeply another time, but we can already see him as an early man on the ground in the Nazi project, connected to all these people. It is no coincidence that Houston Stewart and Stuart Houston come from the same families in the same project. But let's return to William Patrick Stuart Houston. I really suggest you study his wiki page. He was born in Liverpool. This is curious since the Houston Stewart family was related to the Stanleys of Liverpool. Margaret Shaw Stewart married the Duke of Somerset, which linked them to everyone important in the peerage. They were also related to the Maxwells, the Walkers, the Forbes, and the Millers. Otherwise, we aren't told why the Hitlers were in Liverpool. Dowling was allegedly from Dublin, and Hitler was of course from Austria. We are told they were in Liverpool because Alois was avoiding conscription, but since this was 1911, the war wouldn't start for about 3 years yet. If he was dodging the upcoming war, he didn't do a very good job of it because we are told he returned to Austria in 1914 to gamble and find a second wife. Just in time for the start of the war. And yes, he was a bigamist. Addendum, January 28, 2017. I discovered more evidence today at thedailymail.uk. In an article from 2014, we find that while in Liverpool, Alois worked at a Jewish cafe. Even better, they gave us a picture of Alois Hitler. See a problem? It doesn't match the other famous photo of him. Not even close. I will be told, yeah, he just got older and thinner. No, getting older and thinner can't change the shape of your nostrils. We are fortunate because these two photos are taken at almost exactly the same angle. Look at the distance from the nose and mouth corner on the far side of the edge of the face. That tells us these two heads are turned away from us at almost exactly the same angle. But in the first photo, the guy has a broad, flat nose at the end. The other guy has a much more narrow nose. Since the second guy is younger, you can't tell me he had a nose job to make his nose flatter and uglier. The ears don't match either. And we have even more problems. In the consensus sheet posted there, we find him listed as Anton Hitler, age 28. His son Wilhelm is listed as 1 month, which would make this April 1911. But since Alois was born January 1882, in April of 1911 he would have been 29, not 28. And his name wasn't Anton. If he were going to change his name from Alois to fit in England, he would have changed it to something English like Arthur or Alan or Anthony. To the English, Anton wouldn't have sounded any better than Alois. We're told Bridget sent her son William to his bigamist father in Germany in 1929, but that is not believable either. He wouldn't have wished to go, and his mother wouldn't have sent him. Anyway, William was working in a bank in Berlin in 1933, but the rest of his bio up to 1939 is contradictory and sparse. Since he was now 28, notice that we have been told nothing about his early life. We don't know where he went to school, how he learned German, or anything else. Suddenly, in 1939, William Randolph Hearst brought him and his mother to the US for a lecture tour. The theme of the lectures was pro-Nazi. Despite that, we are told that at the outbreak of the war, he was stranded in the US. He joined the US Navy in 1944 and served until 1947. Despite being a pharmacist's mate, he allegedly won a Purple Heart. Why would he serve until 1947? Only so that they could work that number in there. There were laws against foreign nationals serving during the war, and the idea that Hitler's nephew would be allowed to join the US Navy in 1944 in any capacity is beyond absurd. Again, when he was lecturing in 1939, he was telling his audiences how wonderful his uncle was and what a joy Nazism was. Remember, Hearst was pro-Nazi and they admit that. It would be hard to deny since the paper trails stacks to the moon. To scrub that will require a mighty big bonfire. But you wouldn't know it from Hearst's Wikipedia page. We get almost no information on Hearst in the 1930s and 40s, and what we do get is heavily spun. His bio basically stalls at 1934, and all we get is this, quote, "In 1934, after checking with Jewish leaders to ensure a visit would be to their benefit, Hearst visited Berlin to interview Adolf Hitler. When Hitler asked why he was so misunderstood by the American press, Hearst retorted, 'Because Americans believe in democracy and are averse to dictatorship,' end quote." That makes it look like Hearst was anti-Hitler, but Hearst was actually a personal friend of Hitler. For an unspun take on Hearst, you may visit this page, where the authors reprint actual documents of the time. So William Hitler's page is a complete reversal of the truth at all points. We're told William married a woman named Phyllis Jean Jacques, who was born in Germany in the 1920s. Really? No actual date of birth for this person? Why? Because she is another ghost. Jean Jacques isn't a German name, and it isn't a surname. It is a French given name. Although the couple had 4 sons from 1945 to 1961, none of them had any children, ending that bloodline. Convenient. I typed Phyllis Stewart Houston of New York into instant checkmate. She is there, age 93, but although she has many aliases, no mention of the name Jean Jacques. Also strange that William does not come up as a relative. Only Alex, Brian, and Louis. No son Howard Ronald, special agent for the IRS. Same thing at Intellius. No William, no Howard. But back to Hitler. The name Heidler itself is uncertain. It was also given in various documents as Hickler and Hootler. All this fudging about something that shouldn't be so variable leads me to believe all the names are slurred. Yes, I think they are all fake, the real name most likely being Hiller. You will see more evidence of this wild goose chase in a moment, but for now I will tell you why I think the name is Hiller. It is because the Hillers were prominent and wealthy Jews in Vienna and Germany, and it would explain the connections Hitler later had in both places. To get you started, see this link to Ferdinand von Hiller, 1811 to 1885, famous composer and conductor. A student of Hummel, he was already prominent enough at age 15 to visit Beethoven on his deathbed. He was a friend of Spohr, Hauptmann, and Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn is admitted to be Jewish. Hiller was from a family of wealthy cloth merchants. His father was originally Isaac Hittelsheim, but he changed the name in around 1780 to hide all his Jewish roots. This would also help his son, since it would link him to the earlier famous Hiller composers like Johann Adam Hiller. Also remember that Disraeli told us many of the top composers were crypto-Jews. That means Hitler's real name was not Hitler, Hütler, Hickler, Heidler, or any other. It was Hildesheim. I think you see now why they had to make up so many ridiculous stories to hide that. Although his mother's side is even more important, and we will get to that in a minute, the name Hildesheim on his father's side would have killed the story by itself. As you can see from the scroll bar, I came to that conclusion very fast after just a cursory look at the evidence here. As usual, I came into the question cold, not knowing anything about it before today. That's the way I like to do it. I don't read anyone else's opinion on the subject, I just look at the baseline data, as close to the ground as possible. Does this mean I am jumping to conclusions? No, it means the answer was very obvious to someone not groomed to follow the lies. These things are not hidden in plain sight. In fact, they aren't hidden at all. They are like poop in a kitten's cat box. The little guy just throws some litter around, but doesn't even bother to be sure it covers the poop. For another Jewish Hiller, see the socialist writer Kurt Hiller. He was from the same period as Hitler, flourishing in Germany in the 1920s. He was also a gay rights activist, taking over the chair of the Scientific Humanitarian Committee from Magnus Hirschfeld in 1929. This indicates he was a leading spook of the time. He was probably from the same family as Hitler. Why do I say that? Because Hiller has a family resemblance to Hitler. We don't actually have any good pictures of Hitler young, in my opinion. They are all faked or manipulated. However, that one is about as good as we are going to get. I didn't draw the marks on the ear. They are already there for reasons unknown to me. However, they may have been drawn by the muses as a clue for us. Although Hiller's ears stick out more, I think you can see the very close shape match. It is astonishing, really. They also both have heavy-lidded eyes that slope down on the corners. The noses are similar and the eye-to-mouth distance is about the same. To see Hitler's eyes a bit better, we can switch to this one. There, you can see better how heavy-lidded and sloping Hitler's eyes were, even young. Same ear and nose as the previous Hitler, indicating the same person. I say that because we will see below that many of the famous Hitlers don't match at all. Before we get there, we can practice on these two. I already noticed something from just those two. It is the same guy, as I said, but the first one has been manipulated. Look at his eye to your right in the first one. It looked strange to me immediately, but I couldn't spot the problem until I imported the second picture of him. They used the eye from the second one to paste into the first one. Look closer. The eye to your right doesn't match the eye to your left. The eye has been taken from the other photo, pasted in, and then the lid fold above it has been drawn in the wrong place. In fact, I now think the entire first photo was faked using the second as a guide. That's why the left eyes, cheeks, and ears look like carbon copies. This is why it is good to have a portrait painter doing your analysis for you here. I have even been hired occasionally to retouch old photos, so I can see when things have been repainted. When things are wrong, even small things, they jump out at me. But we will look at more photos later. Let's go back to the genealogy. For more on the name Hiller, I refer you to the wiki page on that name, where we find much support. See Arthur Hiller, film director of over 33 films, including Love Story, admitted to be Jewish. There is no genealogy past his parents. Stanley Hiller, a pioneering developer of the helicopter. Notice that he is linked to Berkeley and billionaire Henry J. Kaiser. We just saw him in my paper on Max Kaiser. Hiller's genealogy is very well scrubbed and with no grandparents. No children are listed for him or any of his siblings, which is unlikely. Then we find actress Wendy Hiller, daughter of major cotton merchant Frank Hiller and wife of Ronald Gow, son of a banker. Otherwise, her genealogy is totally scrubbed. You would expect Hiller to be a very common name, wouldn't you? So ask yourself why Wikipedia lists only 20, with 7 of those minor sports figures. I suggest it is because once you have scrubbed Hitler and everyone remotely related to him, you don't have much left. Addendum, March 4th, 2017. In playing an old game of Trivial Pursuit, Original Genus Edition 1981, I came across a question asking what British city did Adolf Hitler study art in? The answer? Liverpool! Wow, Trivial Pursuit is known for including mainstream propaganda questions, but not for including conspiracy theory. So in 1981, this bit of knowledge must have been mainstream. It is now poo-pooed by paid mainstream historians and talking heads in the media. But we do have paper evidence for it. Alois's wife, Bridget, wrote a book in the 1930s, and in it she admits Adolf was in Liverpool in 1912 through 1913. These paid historians dismiss her admission, telling us she was just trying to make money with the book. Maybe she was, but that doesn't address the question, does it? Are they saying she could charge more for the book by mentioning Liverpool? Do they have evidence of kickbacks paid to her by the Liverpool Chamber of Commerce for the plug? No, they are obviously just trying to misdirect so it will be ignored. So we now have evidence linking not just Alois to Liverpool, but Adolf himself. And again, the question is, why Liverpool? Why not Galway or Glasgow or Canterbury? What is the real connection to Liverpool? I found the likely answer in the paper after this one, where I was led back to Liverpool by Stanley Hiller, helicopter developer you just met. I ran his genealogy and found that this famous American inventor of the 20th century had a daughter who married a Chadwick in a big wedding in London.
That ties in here, because the Chadwicks not only hailed from Ainsley, they also hailed from Liverpool.
What's more, they were from the peerage, being baronets who took over the huge and impressive Stanley Manor outside Liverpool. I showed that this indicated a connection between the Chadwicks and Stanleys and through them to the Hillers. In fact, it may be where Stanley Hiller got his first name. So it appears this may be why the Hitlers were in Liverpool. It looked to me like they had kin in Liverpool, and this kin just happened to go right to the top. The Stanleys had been at the top of the peerage for centuries and had actually installed several kings in the past. Although now apparently less prominent than a family like the Spencer Churchills, they may simply have gone underground to some extent, having all the old power or more, but choosing to stay out of the limelight. In support of that, I again point to Bridget Hitler being a Dowling. That name is prominent in the peerage, possibly tying her to all these people as well. The Dowlings are linked to the Stuarts and through them to everyone including the Stanleys. I would say that Hitler's presence in Liverpool before World War I indicates the Stanleys were involved in the Hitler Project from the ground floor. We will follow that important clue in upcoming papers. We will switch to the maternal lines. Hitler's mother is given as Clara Pauls. Her mother is Johanna Huttler or Hootler. Johanna's sister is given as Josepha Hiedler. But we already saw those names on the paternal side, didn't we? Are we supposed to believe Hitler's parents were first cousins, or are our brains just being stirred further? I suggest the latter. I suggest they had some names they needed to scrub in those positions, so they just inserted variations of the name Hitler again as further confusion. So I am just going to blow by those names. The clues are farther back. Hitler's great-great-great-great-grandfather is listed as Simon Pollock. That looks like a Jewish name to me, and we have already tied the Pollocks to the families in previous papers. See my comments on Jackson Pollock, for instance. Or search on Pollock Jewish, and you will find literally hundreds of hints. If we keep going back from there, we soon come to Haters, which looks like yet another variation of Hitler. They may have had another name that needed to be scrubbed in that position. These haters are the end of the line. So let's go forward 3 generations to the Hootlers. Hitler's great-grandmother married Joseph Hootler, and she is listed as Eva Maria Decker. But her father is listed as a Tecker. His father is a Docker. His father is a Docker, and his father is a Decker. So more misdirection. The Deckers are related to the Artners. This attempt at misdirection is pathetically weak, since all those names are Jewish. Decker is a common Jewish name to this day. See Cody Decker. Or just run a search on Decker Jewish. So is Artner. Go here to see that Hugo Artner, Jewish merchant in Stuttgart, allegedly had all his property confiscated by the Nazis in 1933. See also Lillian Artner, who married famous communist Lou Kenton in the same year. Also the art critic for the Chicago Tribune, Alan Artner. This is very important because Decker is in the direct maternal line of Hitler. This is the line that determines whether Hitler is Jewish in the eyes of Judaism. The name Pollock is also in that line. One step back from Pollock in the maternal line, we find the name Feitinger, which is more misdirection. They have misspelled it on purpose. It is Feitinger, and it is also Jewish. See Christine Feitinger writing at that link. Also see historian Johannes Feitinger. Also writer Christian Feitinger. This Feitinger is listed as being from Graz.
Is he the same as the Christian Feitinger at the IAF? I could find no confirmation, but possibly. Both are connected to Graz. If so, it is curious to see the head of the International Aeronautical Federation writing in 2011 about othering and exclusion.
But it is even easier. Hitler's mother was a Pauls, remember? Well, that is also Jewish. See the 1942 Jewish census in Romania, where we find many Poles. Also see here. This is why they want you looking at Hitler's paternal grandmother, Schicklgruber. If you are looking at her, you aren't looking at his mother, Pauls. They need to get your eyes off her immediately. So why don't they scrub this better? Do they assume we are all idiots? Yes! They assume no one will do their own research on this question or any other. They assume you will go to second-hand sources, and as long as all those sources spin this, they figure you won't catch on. They know you won't trust your own eyes at some place like Genie.com, so you will Google search on it. When you do, you will find the 2 planted paths for you. On path 1, Hitler isn't Jewish at all. On path 2, planted by Stormfront, Jewwatch, History.com, etc., Hitler is Jewish in a couple of unimportant lines. Plus, they figure the only ones really asking questions here are Gentiles, and they figure we are dumb as dirt. They think we can't decode these names like Pauls or Feitinger as Jewish, or that we will believe it when they tell us the names aren't Jewish. So they only have to partially scrub Hitler's genealogy at places like Genie.com. They may have removed a few names like Cohen or Einstein or Freud or something, but that just leaves these others up there. So with almost no research, we have already found Hitler is Jewish in all or almost all his lines. He is Jewish on both the maternal and paternal side, and on his mother's side, the important one, he is Jewish in many lines. There is no way he wasn't aware of it. Given that, we may assume that the whole story about his paternal grandmother being a servant is also false. Like everyone else, we have outed Hitler looks to have been from wealth. He would never have been chosen for his part if he weren't from wealth. To be picked for the magnificent beer hall push fake, Hitler must have been from the top Jewish families of Germany and Austria. If you aren't yet convinced, that is fine. I'm not finished. But if you haven't read my paper on the beer hall push, do so immediately before moving ahead. When documents have been scrubbed and/or changed, building a case requires compiling a lot of surrounding and partial evidence, and that paper is an important part of the pile here. Addendum, January 3, 2018. I just became aware of an article at the Jewish Telegraph Agency from May 10, 2017, after this paper came out, which admits the surname Hitler was a common Jewish name, even in New York City. They reference an article from their own journal of 1933, which reports that more than 30 Jewish families across the city bore the surname Hitler. They try to pass this off as ironic, but it is something more than that. They do not tell us how many Jewish families in New York City and the US or in the world had the surnames Hiller or Hildesheim, but I will tell you that in the meantime, I have also linked the name Hiller to the names Heller and Hillel. It now looks like Hillel is the original name from which all these others derived. Hillel, the Elder D, 10 AD, the namesake of the most prominent line of Jewish rabbis in European history. To add to the pile, I will now show you that it wasn't only Hitler. All the other big names are Jewish as well, including Goebbels, Himmler, Hess, and Eichmann. We will start with Otto Adolf Eichmann. The first clue is his picture at Genie.com. Wow, I hate to admit it, but before today I couldn't have told you that Eichmann looked as an older man. I have never previously studied him. Like a lot of these questions, I come in cold, which is probably why I can be fresh and objective. But I think we have to admit he looks very Jewish at a glance. I won't rest my case on it, as usual, but I consider this picture to be fair data. There is no reason not to look at it. The only picture of Eichmann that comes to mind is this one in his uniform. But there we are signaled strongly by all the Nazi regalia. We don't dare ask ourselves if he looks Jewish. That question is blocked. It never occurred to me before a few months ago, but now I have to say he looks very Jewish. In fact, he looks a bit ridiculous in that uniform. He reminds me of someone. Who could it be? Yes, Don Knotts was Jewish. Actually, Eichmann looks more Jewish than Knotts, especially in the ears and nose. And don't laugh too hard at Don Knotts. That's him with his wife, Loralee Zukna. Here's Eichmann's alleged wife. The lesson. If you are a Jewish actor and they give you the choice of playing the head of the SS or a small-town deputy, go for the deputy. I have to insert some levity in these things or we would all go mad. Speaking of Eichmann's wife, she is a clue here. She wasn't German. They had met she was Czech and her name was Leibel. That's Jewish. Also see here, and here, and here.
Also see the name Liebel. The next thing to notice is how scrubbed Eichmann's maternal side is at Genie.com. Only his mother is given as Schefferling. Her parents aren't given, so we are supposed to believe Eichmann's grandparents aren't known. Right. Same thing on his father's side, no grandparents. A total information embargo on one of the most important figures of the 20th century.
Even his name is different at different mainstream sites. At Wiki and Genie, we find him listed as Otto Adolf Eichmann. At HistoryPlace.com, he is listed as Karl Adolf Eichmann. It looks like they could agree on that. But that is not the only strange mistake. In this declassified September 15, 1948 FBI document to the CIA director, Hoover calls him Adolf Karl Eichmann. That is his father. As another clue, it is admitted in his FBI document that Eichmann could speak Yiddish, Hebrew, and several Arabic dialects. Really? If you wish to wipe out an entire race, would you take the time to learn their language? Say you wish to destroy every cat on the planet. Would you learn to meow? Beyond that, remember that in Eichmann's bio, we are told he dropped out of vocational college and worked as district manager for an oil company. So when and why did he learn Hebrew and Yiddish and several Arabic dialects? He was 26 when he joined the Nazi Party, and we are told he advanced due to his knowledge of the enemy. So he must have already known all of this in his 20s. And we find another problem in that FBI document. This one is a doozy.
Director Hoover tells us Eichmann was born in the German colony Sarona, which is now the seat of the Israel government and called Haikira. But the current story is that Eichmann was born in Solingen, Germany. Given that, it is worth searching on Sarona. Wiki tells us it is a German Templar colony founded in 1871, now a neighborhood of Tel Aviv. It was a model for Jewish pioneers. This means that Hoover has admitted Eichmann was Jewish.
I will be told that the Templars in Palestine were millennial Protestants. Sure they were. That's why they were a model for Jewish pioneers. The Templar movement was started by Christoph Hoffmann. His older brother was Wilhelm Hoffmann, first president of the Jerusalem Association in Berlin. But if you still insist these people were not Jewish, answer me this. Why change Eichmann's place of birth from Sarona to Solingen? If they weren't hiding he was Jewish, why the change? Here's something else for you to explain. During World War II, we are told a couple of curious things about Sarona. 1. It became rapidly pro-Nazi. 2. In 1941, the British came in and interned the whole village, deported the 188 worst Nazis to Australia. If Sarona was a town of millennial Protestants, why were they pro-Nazi? According to the story, we are told millennial were philo-Semitic, like Mormons. They loved Jews, which is why they were in Palestine pretending to be Jews. So they wouldn't support the Nazis, would they? Also notice the number 188. Aces and eights, as usual. Another signal this is a project. And then we have the British mandate coming in and interning the whole village as if it is Jewish. The Brits didn't intern Nazis, they arrested them as prisoners of war. So again, everything is pointing to these people being Jews. And now you understand why they were pro-Nazi. Nazism was a cover for Zionism, which was about Jews going to Palestine. The top Nazis were Jewish, so of course these Jews in Palestine were going to support them. If the head of the FBI will admit Eichmann was Jewish, we don't really need his genealogy, do we? So why don't they seem to know this at Stormfront? Seems like a slam dunk, right? You just post it at the top of the page 1. I will tell you it is because Stormfront is another front. It was created by the same people as Opposition Control. They tell you what to think on both sides of the argument. Notice that when you link into Stormfront from a search, you never link to a paper where someone with a real name and a real bio is explaining things to you sensibly. No, you always link into some chat room where unsubstantiated opinions are flying around all over the place, instead of straightforward research like I am giving you. You get 17 kinds of misdirection. That is no accident. But let's return to the name Hoffmann. You will remember that Hitler's personal photographer was Heinrich Hoffmann. They go back to 1921. It was Hoffmann who introduced Hitler to his studio assistant Eva Braun. So it is another coincidence that Eichmann and Hitler, who went to the same high school in Linz 17 years apart, both were later connected to Hoffmann's. Also strange that we have no biographical information on Heinrich Hoffmann at Wikipedia. They blow right by it. At Genie.com we find that he was the husband of Maria Baumann. That's pretty curious because the Christoph Hoffmann we looked at above was the son of Beat Baumann. This indicates the two Hoffmanns were related. We also find that Heinrich Hoffmann's mother was Kargl. That is also Jewish. See Gallery George Kargl in Vienna right now. He runs Jewish-themed shows several times a year. Did you know that before becoming a Nazi, Eichmann worked for an American oil company? Really? Which one? We are told it was the Vacuum Oil Company, but that is misdirection. The Vacuum Oil Company didn't exist in the 1900s since it had merged with Standard Oil in 1879. I will be told that when Standard Oil was split in 1911, Vacuum went back to being independent, but that is baloney. Regardless, it re-emerged in 1931, so the point is moot. Eichmann worked for them until 1933, so either way Eichmann was working for the Rockefellers. In fact, that is where he was working when he was discovered. He went directly from Standard Oil to the SS. It says so at Wikipedia. But let's go back to the Vacuum Oil Company for a moment before we move on. It was founded in 1866 by Matthew Ewing and Hiram Bond Everest. Hold on. Haven't we seen the name Hiram Bond before? Yes, in my paper on Jack London. London hung out with the Bonds both in Alaska and on their ranches in California. Bond was a billionaire involved in everything from coast to coast. He started out working for the Vanderbilts, married a Higgins, and was a member of Edwin Booth's Players Club in New York. Edwin was the brother of John Wilkes Booth, of course. So who was Hiram Bond Everest? Wikipedia has a page for him, but refuses to tell us who he was. The page is complete bombast. Genie.com also refuses to tell us, scrubbing his maternal line after his mother, a Robertson. On his father's side, we find Cheneys, Perrys, and Clements. This last name probably links us to Mark Twain, Clements, since we are told Twain lost his shorts investing in one of Hiram Bond's schemes. Here's a weird coincidence. One of Hitler's ancestral families was given as Hayter, as we saw above. In Hiram Bond's Everest genealogy, we find him descended from the family Hayden. So it is curious to find Eichmann later working for a company founded by Everest. As we go back in time, these Haydens became Haydens and are from Braintree, Massachusetts. The given names at this point are very Jewish, including Moses, Hannah, Ebenezer, Ruth, Daniel, Elijah, Josiah, and Jerusha. So where did they come from before that? It is scrubbed. Want to guess who scrubbed it? Erica, the disconnectrix Houghton. We found she ditched the middle name for a few days, but it is back. So, this begs the question, was Hitler related to this Everest? And were they both related to the composer Haydn? Is the Hayter in Hitler's genealogy a slur of Haydn? Maybe. We're always told these relationships don't exist, but we have always been able to show they do. I will have to leave it for later though. Since we get no information on Hiram Bond Everest's relationship on Hiram Bond, let's switch to Hiram Bond's genealogy and try to research it from that end. He also has no ancestry pages at Genie.com, but we can dig up some information. Here we find his mother is Alameda Slusser, daughter of Levi Lewis Slusser. Not only do we link to the Lewises, see my paper on C.S. Lewis, but we have a first name of Levi, indicating he was Jewish. More indication of this is the name Slusser, which was originally Schlosser, meaning locksmith. A prominent line of Jewish Schlossers came from Prague and is listed in the Holocaust memorial books. Anyway, the Everests go back to New Haven, where they married into the Jones clan around 1700. These Joneses were related to the Booths, Clarks, Faulkners, and Morrisons. We have seen them all before, haven't we? At any rate, this is who Eichmann was working for in 1933 when he was tapped for the SS. Do you really think that is a coincidence? But let's back up a few years. Another clue is found in the admitted fact that Eichmann and Hitler went to the same high school in Linz. That also indicates Hitler was from wealth. Why? Because Eichmann was from wealth. This was a school for rich kids. Eichmann's dad was a commercial manager of Linz Tramway and the electrical company, and Adolf Eichmann played the violin. Eichmann's playing the violin is yet another clue here, since we are seeing many links to famous composers like Hiller, Haydn, and Mendelssohn. These families were connected to the arts. Also confirming this is Hitler's links to the Prussian Royal Theatre, which we studied in my previous paper.
Even before 1923, Hitler was being groomed by Dietrich Eckart, protege of theater director Count George von Holstein-Hieseler. The other founder of the vacuum oil company was Matthew Ewing. Who is he? Wikipedia tells us he was a carpenter. And that's it. Okay, more likely he was related to Thomas Ewing, Secretary of the Treasury in 1841 and father-in-law of General Sherman. Ewing had 3 sons that were also major generals in the Civil War: Thomas, Hugh, and Charles. Thomas Jr. was also an attorney, and he represented Ford Theater after the fake assassination of Lincoln. Hugh became a major general despite flunking out of West Point. It helps when your foster brother is General Sherman. Thomas Sr.'s great-grandmother was Dorothy Sayre, which name we have seen before. It was Zelda Fitzgerald's maiden name. It's Jewish. Ewing was also descended from Hannah Grant, so he was related to that general as well. Since vacuum oil was found in 1866, the year after the Civil War ended, you can see why I suggest Matthew Ewing was related to these folks.
It would be very useful to be related to all these generals in 1866, wouldn't it? But let's return to Eichmann. At Stormfront, the question of Eichmann's ancestry is broached, and the first answer given is that Eichmann couldn't be Jewish because no Jew would have a first name of Adolf. Wrong. In previous papers, both Josh and I have shown that dozens of famous Jews have been named Adolf or Adolf.
The only name we are given in Eichmann's genealogy was the name Schefferling.
Since the mainstream admits Eichmann was teased as a boy and called the little Jewish boy by his classmates, we should ask why. We are told this teasing caused him to hate Jews, but we are never given a good reason why he was called that. We are told it was due to his complexion, but that isn't really believable.
I suggest it was because his mother was Jewish, which would mean Schefferling was a Jewish name. I also suggest the ling was added as misdirection. She wasn't a Schefferling, she was a Scheffer, which is Jewish. See Emanuel Scheffer, Israeli footballer. Also Maria Scheffer, interviewed by Hannah Arendt. William Scheffer, Jewish basketballer. Halo Scheffer, Jewish guide, and thousands of others. Just search on Scheffer Jewish.
Okay, the next big clue is given us at Wikipedia when they tell us Eichmann's mother-in-law was named Maria Zarzel. That's another fudge or purposeful misspelling. Zarzal is a famous old Jewish name. See Moses Zarzel, poet and doctor to King Henry III of Castile in about 1400. His father was the famous astronomer Abraham Zarzel. The name later morphed into the name Herzl, which is the second biggest clue in this section on Eichmann. The first was Hoover basically admitting he was Jewish. If you search on that name at Wiki, you are taken to the page for Theodor Herzl. And who was he? He just so happens to be one of the fathers of Zionism. He formed the first Zionist Congress in 1897, which promoted Jewish immigration to Palestine and the formation of a Jewish state there. Herzl used the Dreyfus Affair in France to promote his plans, and we have seen in Josh's paper on that subject. Josh shows us there what I am telling you about Zionism here. He says explicitly in that paper on Dreyfus that the event was faked to scare Jews into leaving Europe and to go to Palestine. Wikipedia admits it was Eichmann's job in the beginning to do the very same thing. So do you think it is a wild coincidence that Eichmann's mother-in-law had the same name as the guy, Herzl, just with a garbled spelling? Do you really think that is no relation? How about this further coincidence? If we check Herzl's genealogy, we find his daughter married Richard Newman. Two of Richard's sisters married Adolf Braun. Remember Eva Braun? But before I get to Eva, let me finish with Theodor Herzl. Here is what we find at Wikipedia. His work on auto-emancipation was prefigured by a similar conclusion drawn by Marx's friend Moses Hess in Rome and Jerusalem, 1862. This was just 30 years earlier. Of course, this Moses Hess was Jewish, but they tell you Rudolf Hess couldn't be Jewish. They admit Rudolf Hess's father was a wealthy merchant, but he couldn't have been Jewish. So ask yourself this: why would this son of a rich merchant join the Nazi Party, which was a workers' party? Hess was NSDAP member number 16, so he was basically a founder of NSDAP. Can you put two and two together? NSDAP, allegedly a workers' party, was founded by the sons of wealthy merchants. Dietrich Eckart was also a founder, and he was also from wealth and privilege.
He was a protege of Count von Holstein-Hieseler.
We have previously found that communism, allegedly a theory promoting workers' rights, was founded by Marx, related to billionaires through his mother and wife. How hard is it to spot these projects? Okay, so let's hit Eva Braun. Her mother was Fanny Kronberger. Reminds us of figure skater Lily Kronberger, doesn't it? She was Jewish. Even better, in the American Jewish Yearbook, Volume 14, 1912, we find that in Austria, Leopold Kronberger received the title of court counselor October 20th, 1911. Just so you know, the AJY is a report of important things that happened to Jewish people. The famous physicist Hans Kronberger is also admitted to be Jewish, and what is more, he was from Linz, the same city Eichmann and Hitler went to school. In the Jewish Encyclopedia, we find Emil Kronberger, author of Zionisten and Christen. It looks to me like physicist Hans Kronberger from Linz is closely related to Eva Braun. Both genealogies are scrubbed, but not very well. Hans was born in 1920, Eva Braun 1912. Her mother Fanny was named Franziska, and she was born 1885 according to Genie.com. In other genealogies of that time and era of Vienna, we find several Hans Kronbergers related to Franziska Kronbergers. For instance, here we find a Hans Kronberger, father of Hans, son and brother of Franziska. You won't believe what I found when researching Hans Kronberger's genealogy. In about 1900, a Hans Kronberger of Vienna married an Ida Pauline Knotz. Do you see it? Knotz equals knots. We saw Don Knotz above. Just for fun, I checked Don Knott's genealogy for any links to Vienna or Austria. I didn't find any on a quick look, but he does have an interesting genealogy.
He is related to the Moores, Cadwells, Pierces, Franks, Shrivers, Bishops, Jones, Robinsons, Sedgwicks, and Keeners.
For one thing, it looks like he is related to Mary Tyler Moore. She is also a Lewis, a Melville, a Riley, a Cooney, probably Clooney, and a Schindler. Her great-grandfather was a lieutenant colonel in the CSA. But back to Eva Braun. Another curious thing is that her uncle was named Alois Winbauer. So we get that name again. His occupation is given as a jeweler, another famous Jewish occupation. Winbauer is also a Jewish name. See this Genie.com page on Martin Winbauer, which not only admits this Winbauer was Jewish, but that he may have been related to Eva Braun. Also mentioned are DNA tests on her, which also confirm Jewish blood. Which brings us to this 2014 article in the London Independent that I didn't even know about. The tests on Braun were run by Britain's Channel 4, and they confirmed Ashkenazi heritage. As with Hitler's DNA, the article attempts to spin the outcome, downplaying its significance. The authors failed to do that in my opinion. We're told a Channel 4 spokesman said that Braun was a Catholic and very unlikely to have known her ancestry. Right. And that is based on what evidence? Just this spokesman's word? Also of interest is the admission in the article that hairs allegedly belonging to Hitler were sold to Channel 4 by David Irving for £3,000, but they turned out to be fake. This also confirms my reading of Irving in recent papers. For more evidence Winbauer is Jewish, just search on Winbauer Jewish. Addendum, February 16, 2017. While studying faked pictures of Hitler, for another addendum, you will find at the bottom of this paper, I tripped across some pictures of Eva Braun, which, while not faked, were very interesting for another reason. It is possible she was a twin. It is known Eva had a sister, Gretel, allegedly more than 3 years younger. It is also admitted they looked much alike. What is not always normally admitted is that many people couldn't tell them apart. But at this page at fold3.com, the author does admit it, showing that many photos have been mistagged over the years. We also find pictures of the sisters together, which suggest they may have been twins. These two pictures were taken at Kielsenhaus and are confirmed to be Eva and Gretel, although the author only guesses that Eva is on the left. I would agree, since the girl on the left seems to have lighter hair, and we are used to Eva as a blonde. But the author then admits the common confusion posting these two photos. She says they were probably taken the same day due to the dress, and that they are usually identified as Eva. However, she argues they are Gretel based on details of the dress. I think she is right because the flowers are star-shaped, not round. She has a good eye. Before we move on, notice two more things about the first two photos. Notice they are almost dressed as twins. Yes, the patterns on the dresses are a tiny bit different, but it is very subtle. Not only are the patterns nearly identical, so are the cuts. The sleeves and waists are the same, and it looks like the lengths are the same. But there's more. They have parted their hair on the same side in the same place. The hair looks the same length with the same amount of curl. They are even wearing similar watches on the same wrist. What is more, these two pictures weren't taken on the same day, as it would first appear. Although the brick is similar, indicating the same house, it isn't the same day, indicating this matched dressing wasn't a one-time thing. How do I know? Can't you see it? I will give you a moment. Did you find it? In the second one, Gretel isn't wearing a watch. Sisters in their 20s who aren't twins are normally pretty independent. They don't enjoy looking exactly alike, so it is very curious to find these sisters dressing so much alike. But back to the page at fold 3. The author then gives us this one. That is one of the iconic Eva Braun photos, but she shows it is Gretel. Eva herself labeled it as Gretel in her own photo album. That should make you take a beat. If that is Gretel, then she didn't just look somewhat like Eva, she looked almost exactly like Eva. You will say we have lots of pics of the two sisters together, but the author admits many of them are mistagged as well. She shows that in many photos of the two girls together, the second girl is Eva's best friend, Herta Schneider, not Gretel. One photo she does not mention is this famous one. What a bone-headed fake that is! That is supposed to be all three sisters with Gretel in the middle. Start by noticing that Ilse is lit from your left, while Eva is lit from your right. The hottest spot on Ilse is on her left cheek, while the hottest spot on Eva is on her right temple. How does that work? And why is Gretel 2 shades darker than Eva? She isn't even the same color of gray, for crimini's sake. Take that photo into Photoshop and do a color analysis on it. I don't have to because I can do it with my eyes. What to look at is the color of the middle tones, like where the faces meet the hair. Eva is much yellower, while Gretel is more blue. You will say, "Are you crazy?" It is a black and white photo. How can you see blue or yellow in it? Because, remember, in a photo, black is not the absence of color, it is all colors. So, just as with paint, you can have a warmer or a cooler black. If you have a simplified program like GIMP or something, it is programmed to read a photo like this as colorless, in which case you can't get a color reading on it. In that case, you can add a sepia tone and then adjust the color levels on that, showing up the fake. If all that is beyond you, just look at Gretel's shirt. Look closely at the top line of her shoulder. See how that line is fairly sharp? Ask yourself why that is so much sharper than the lines on the other women's blouses. The blur on that shirt doesn't match the blur of the rest of the photo, indicating a fake. What's going on here is that they have taken two photos of Ava and pasted them together. In one, Ava has penciled in her eyebrows more heavily, and they have darkened her hair after the fact. But the noses are identical. You will say, if they have twins, why not just photograph them together? Why paste two photos of Ava together? Because if they do that, you see we have identical twins here. They don't want the sisters looking alike because that raises the questions I am raising. So it is better to put forward manipulated photos where they darken Ava, pencil in her eyebrows, and make other changes in the lab. This makes the sisters look similar, but not too similar. Here they are again, dressed as twins. You will say, oh, well, I can tell them apart. That is Ava behind. You may be right, and that would be my guess as well, but you have to admit it is strange to find two sisters allegedly 3.5 years apart dressing in identical outfits. It would be odd enough if they were children, but at age 18 or whatever they are here. And do they look 3.5 years apart? I say they don't. That would make Gretel 16, while Ava would be 19.5. It's possible, but it is also possible they are both 17 and are twins. Why does it matter? Because it is just one more sign they are part of a big Intel project here. Intel loves twins, as we have seen in many previous papers. But we aren't finished. Our author admits there was a third sister, Elsie, who also looked much like the other two. That is supposed to be her above, but since that photo is a fake, that could be anybody. Strangely, Wikipedia gives no date of birth for Elsie, just a year. She was allegedly about 3 years older than Ava, but we have no convincing photos of the three together. If we did, they wouldn't have to lead with the groaner above, would they? Here is one they do bless us with. But that just adds to the mystery since we seem to have 4 clones there, all wearing the same pattern dress/bikini. The two forward girls look like twins to me, since I see nothing to differentiate them except that one has her hair up. The other two are unidentifiable, but they have the same dresses and hair. What did they do, make all their clothes from drapery like in The Sound of Music? This is supposed to be all 3 with their mother. But that's another garbage paste-up. All 4 faces are in different light, and the blurs don't even match. Plus, ask yourself which is Ava. I say the middle sister looks most like Ava, but that is a problem because here the first sister is the blondest, even in the eyebrows. But if the first sister is Ava and the second Gretel, then Gretel here looks more like Ava than Ava does. But it doesn't really matter. If the given story were true, they wouldn't need to fake these photos, so we know it is false. What is it covering? I don't know, but it could be triplets. The next to the last photo indicates some sort of program using multiples, so it could be triplets or quadruplets for all we know. Before I end this addendum, I want to send you to Ilse's page at Wiki where we find her first job was with a Jewish doctor named Martin Livy Marx. Also to Gretel's page, where we find her husband is Hermann Fegelin. His parents are curiously not mentioned. At Genie.com, no mother is listed and no grandparents on either side. Wikitree has nothing on him. Also completely scrubbed at findagrave.com. Is Fagellin a Jewish name? I would assume so. For indication of that, search John Fagellin and go to the listing for Muhlenberg, college class of 1962. In the Google Gloss, we find this list. Fred Bombinger, Bob Buzzard, John Fagellin, Michael Gaynor, Dave Garris, Dottie Dennis Goldman, Becky Lentz Gordon, Ted Gurniak, Mary Jo Metzger Hellick. Collate those surnames. What do you get? Not only are all those names Jewish, they are famous Jewish. Goldman we know about. Bombinger is George Lucas's mother's name. Then there was Mitzi Gaynor. Her mother was a fisher. Then there is Daniel Lentz, Jewish electronic composer, attended Brandeis, showered with fellowships he didn't deserve, as usual. Which brings us back to Fritz Lenz, alleged Nazi eugenicist. His wiki bio gives no parents. He was a protege of Alfred Ploetz, who also has no parents listed. They were linked to Gerhard Hauptmann, also scrubbed in all of the encyclopedias and genealogies. No mother at Wiki and no grandparents at Genie.com. This is a Nobel Prize winner, and we are denied any information about his mother. Genie lists her as a Strahler, but that is meaningless. It just takes us in circles because a search on that takes us to Gunther Strahler-Pohl, a famous Hauptmann captain in the Luftwaffe. But I'll stop before I get too far off track. Lenz, Ploetz, and Hauptmann are grist for a future paper. But if you go to their pages, you will see for yourself they throw up all the usual red flags. Addendum, February 14th, 2018. I had to add this later because at the time of writing of this paper in 2017, I honestly didn't know what I am about to tell you. One of my readers had to send me the link. If you thought of giving Hitler some kind of stud credit for getting triplets when he hooked up with Eva Braun, think again. As with almost everyone else we have studied, Hitler, as it turns out, was gay. Eva and her twins were just beards. For those who don't know, a beard is a woman who poses as the wife or girlfriend of a homosexual. The mainstream has admitted it for years, although I wasn't aware of it until now. See this report from The Guardian back in 2001, publicizing the meticulously researched book of respected German historian Lothar Machen, Hitler's Secret, The Double Life of a Dictator. There, we found out the head of the stormtroopers, Ernst Röhm, is also now admitted to have been gay. It is implied in the article that Hess was also gay and that he and Hitler were lovers. There exists a collection of police reports documenting Hitler's homosexuality, since it was then a crime. These reports were published in Italy some years ago, but for some reason did not get published in either German or English. I think we can guess the reason. If you don't see what I mean, just remember that most actors are gay. They always have been and still are. Therefore, the fact that all these people were gay is just another clue that they were actors. You will say that even if most actors are gay, that doesn't mean that most gays are actors. I have flipped my syllogism, which is true. In most cases, I would not be allowed to do that as a matter of logic. However, in this case, where we have so much supporting evidence these people were actors, we can indeed use this discovery that Hitler was gay as evidence for our theory. Taken alone, it wouldn't be proof of anything, but taken as one clue of many, it is quite useful. It not only fits the profile in the current case, it fits the profile in nearly every case we have looked at through the centuries. Gay Jewish actors are what? 0.00001% of the greater population? And yet almost every person we have studied has fit that profile. Therefore, when we find ourselves researching a new case that is outwardly similar to the old cases, that is to say, riddled with lies, inconsistencies, and impossibilities, and we find the mainstream admitting the person involved is both gay and Jewish, we would be foolish not to look at the probability he was also an actor. That is the true logic of the situation. I also encourage you to read the Wikipedia pages on sexuality of Hitler and on Mockton's book. Both are pathetic misdirection since they provide no rebuttal. We are told most historians believe Hitler was straight, but we aren't told who these historians are or why they believe it. We are told there is no proof Hitler was gay, which you now know is simply false. Mockton published piles of evidence, which Wiki just dismisses with a wave of the hand. And it isn't just Mockton who has compiled evidence. See, for example, this 2016 article of the Irish Examiner, where we find this, quote, "From the outset of the war, he enjoyed a sexual relationship with fellow dispatch runner Ernst Schmidt, which lasted almost 6 years. The relationship was not exclusive, however, and Hitler is believed to have had sexual relations with a senior officer. U.S. intelligence later discovered that Hitler was never promoted during World War I because of his sexual orientation, and that he was arrested in Munich in 1919 for pederasty and theft. Indeed, former Nazi Otto Strasser said that when Hitler became Nazi Party leader in 1921, his personal bodyguards and chauffeurs were almost exclusively homosexual. Two of these bodyguards, Ulrich Graf and Christian Weber, were expected to satisfy their boss's needs whenever necessary." End quote. We also find confirmation here of Hitler's long-term homosexual relationship with Hess. Most amusingly, we find Hess referred to as Fraulein Anna and Black Emma by other Nazi leaders. All this was so obvious and out in the open, one newspaper of the time called the Nazi leaders a brotherhood of poos. But despite the fact that US intel is and was aware of Hitler's orientation, Wiki still takes the time to deny it. Why? Because it doesn't fit the old story, which has done its job fabulously well until now. If even small parts of the mainstream start admitting Hitler was gay and Jewish, the whole house of cards might fall. Someone might put two and two together, as am I, and the entire history of the 20th century might crash into the rubble just a few years after we left it. So Wiki has come in and tried to whitewash the whole thing, which, as usual, it does very poorly. And that brings up the very pertinent question: why doesn't worldwide intel simply squelch all these rumors, stories, and books? Well, it appears they made a mistake, because it appears they thought they could get by with simply spinning the leaks. It is far easier to take control of a leak and spin it than it is to stopper it altogether. Forceful suppression tends to backfire, but intel has become a master of spin. We see that here, where we find both Mulcahy and Mockton appearing to spin their own research. I say appear because I suspect that someone else spun it after the fact. We know intel has the ability to add text to any story they like, either in print media, books, or on TV. See admissions from the New York Times to that effect. So we should not automatically assume that these writers are undercutting their own thesis. Rather, we should assume they can't prevent intel from coming in and rewriting any way they like. This is what I assume is happening when Mulcahy tells us Hitler liked Catholic schoolgirls and later became a reluctant heterosexual. I assume the same thing when The Guardian tells us Hitler killed to hide his homosexuality and went along with sending gays to concentration camps to disguise his own true colors. Neither of those things fits the other evidence, nor does it fit the faked history I have been unwinding myself. Rather, they betray the influence of an outside hand, and if we squint, we can almost see some agent inserting those sentences via some computer link from Langley or Vauxhall. So let's move on to Rudolf Hess. This is also ridiculously easy. His maternal grandmother was listed at Genie.com as Adelheid Ferber. Ferber is a Jewish name. See famous author Edna Ferber, admitted to be Jewish. She wrote Giant, Cimarron, Showboat, and so on. Adelheid's mother was a Gladyschick. It was probably Jewish. We also find the names Munch, Richter, Hurdle, Prahl, and Bueller. Hess was married to Ilse Prahl, also spelled Prohl. Prohl is Jewish. See Friedrich Gutmann's wiki page, where we find he was the head of Prohl and Gutmann, a large bank in Amsterdam after World War I. He was also a major art collector. His father had founded the massive Dresdner Bank, and the family was Jewish. Although he was a claimed convert, at Wiki we are told his father Eugen had converted from Judaism, he was allegedly murdered at Theresienstadt by the Nazis for being a rich Jew. Although we should now find that suspicious. We will have to unwind it another time. Notice the name Hurdle. It should probably have been Herzl, which we have already saw above. This would mean Hess was related to Theodor Herzl, which is not all surprising. Herzl's genealogy doesn't go back that far, 1745, but in another coincidence, Hess's Hurdle is named Johann Hurdle. Herzl's wife was named Johann Herzl. What about the name Richter? Jewish again.
A search on this raises some hackles, with people chiming in to scream Svetslav Richter wasn't Jewish, and so on.
But he was. Just go to his Genie.com pages and find his maternal grandmother. She has no ancestry herself, but they do tell you she was a Rink, which is Jewish. See this page. What about Gerhard Richter? Also Jewish. Richter was a protege of Heinz Lohmar, Jew and communist.
Richter's mother is a Skonfelder, and his wife is a Moritz. His ex-wife is a Genskin. See Erich Skonfelder, co-screenwriter with Ernst Lubitsch. Lubitsch admitted he was Jewish. As you search on it, also include Skonfelder, Skonfeld, and Skonfeld. As for Moritz, see billionaire Michael Moritz, #1 venture capitalist in the world in 2006 through 2007 according to Forbes. He is from Wales and is Jewish.
We should also remember that Moses Hess, who we saw above, is also known as Moritz Hess. We should also think of Ernst Moritz Hess, an allegedly baptized German Jew who commanded Hitler's regiment in World War I. Although allegedly squashed during World War II, he was a judge before and after Hitler's rise and later became a very wealthy railroad tycoon. He was president of the German Federal Railways Authority by 1949. That's very curious and deserves a later look. We are told his mother was Jewish, but we aren't told her name at any of the 50 sites. How about the name Genskin? Also probably Jewish. That is Isa Genskin, ex-wife of Gerhard Richter. In fact, this name ties neatly into this paper, since the alleged head of the medical service of the Waffen-SS was Karl Genskin. He was accused in the medical trial after the war. Curiously, although he was found guilty of horrific crimes including mass human experimentation and many murders, and sentenced to life in prison, his sentence was later reduced to 20 years. He only served 6, if any. No biographical information is given for him at Wiki or any other place. I also found no biographical information on Isa Genskin. So, am I claiming that everyone with all these German names is actually Jewish? No, not any more than I am claiming that everyone in the US with the name Jones or Morris is a crypto-Jew from the major lines. I am simply pointing out that in cases where we already have an avalanche of red flags all pointing in the same direction, we should assume these names like Richter and Hess are Jewish. When the mainstream assures us they aren't, we shouldn't take their word for it. We should do our own research and not pass over any clues. That is all I am doing. Like Sherlock Holmes, I am combing the ground for clues with a magnifying glass, and I'm not letting myself be diverted when passerbys assure me the signs don't mean anything. I will decide what they likely mean by weighing what I find and by no other method. What about other famous Richters? Andy Richter? Well, his genie page is ridiculously scrubbed and might as well be white. But we again get the old adopted dodge. That is red flag number 1. Genie tells us he was adopted. Wiki doesn't. His mother's maiden name is Palmer. Red flag number 2. His dad taught Russian and later came out as gay. Red flags 3 and 4.
Richter's genie page is managed by a Schoenberg. Red flag number 5.
What about physicist Burton Richter? Oh, nice. He is admitted to be Jewish. His mother was Fanny Pollock, which ties into our research above. What about the artist Gustav Richter, who painted Emperor Wilhelm I?
Well, his wife was Cornelie Meyerbeer. She was admitted to be Jewish, being the daughter of opera composer Jacob Liebman Beer, later Giacomo Meyerbeer. Richter's lines are otherwise scrubbed, although his sister married a cross that is very often Jewish.
What about writer and publisher Milan Richter, admitted to be Jewish? What about Argentine scientist Ronald Richter? He was from Austria and apparently his education is unsubstantiated. Richter was called to Argentina by German industrialist and ex-Nazi spy August Siebert. Richter was hired by Juan Perón personally for government projects, although we are told Perón had to override Argentine law to do so. What? What law was that? Was they a law against fleeing Nazis or fleeing Jews? Either way, it is a problem here. Perón wanted him to work on an atomic project, we are told. Wiki admits he faked his work there, which is not surprising. We have found that all atomic work is a cover for something else. So all signs point to Richter being Jewish. They also point to Juan Perón being Jewish. Check out his genie pages. Despite being president of Argentina for over 9 years, he has almost no bio in several lines. His maternal line is scrubbed past his grandfather, Juan Sosa. His paternal line is even stranger. His great-grandmother is listed as Anne Hughes Mackenzie of London, daughter of Stephen Hughes and Elizabeth Mackenzie. But of course, if those are her parents, she wasn't a Mackenzie and the name is wrong. But the punch is in Perron's maternal line, of course. His great-grandmother is the main maternal line is given as Victoria Pinheiro. That's Jewish. See the Jewish Encyclopedia where we find Arthur Wing Pinheiro, English dramatist who worked with Henry Irving. He is admitted there to be Sephardic. He married a Moor. Wiki admits Pinheiro was Jewish through his paternal grandfather, who would have also been named Pinheiro. The Jewish Encyclopedia admits the name was originally Pinheiro, so we should search on that as well. At the University of Minnesota, we find that the Jewish family Pinheiro was prominent on Nevis and Barbados for nearly 150 years. It is interesting to find Barbados here since of course we found Samuel Parris of the Salem witch trials came from there at the same time. Before that, the Pinheiros were from Madrid and Amsterdam. Also see this page and also this page where we learn from Pinheiro's involvement in the slave trade in the early 1700s. Also notice the name Perron is a slur of Pinheiro. Just move the N to the end, and Pinheiro becomes Perron. But Perron is supposed to come from the paternal line while Pinheiro comes from the maternal line. This indicates Perron's parents were cousins. Surprisingly, the name Sosa may also be Jewish. JewOrNotJew.com, run by Jews, admits it. We have Gaspar Castano de Sosa, called a borderline Jew, but admitted to be a slaver and Jew and friend of slaver and Jew Louis de Carabajal. Also, Mercedes Sosa, singing at this link in Hebrew during a visit to Israel. The mainstream admits she was a Peronist, but does not admit she was Jewish. Also does not admit she was probably related to the Perons. The Perons were Sosas, as we saw at Jeannie. There was also a Thomas de Sosa denounced as a Jew in Zacatecas, as you see here and also here, where we find Abraham de Sosa as a licensed Jewish merchant in New York. At the same link, we find a Domingo de Sosa, a Jewish victim of the Cartagena Inquisition. What about Eva Peron? First, let's look at Juan Peron's third wife, Maria Martinez. Jeannie scrubs her parents. No grandparents known for this famous person, President of Argentina. As for Eva Peron, her grandfather was an Uhart or Huart. The line is scrubbed beyond that. Why? Because it is Jewish. See Lee Realdo Historia de España, 1954, page 549, where it is admitted. Do you want to guess who wrote it? A Castro. Americo Castro. You will remember that the only mainstream person who admits that Fidel Castro is Jewish is Fidel Castro. On her mother's side, Eva Peron is descended from Juan of Florida, Ponce de Leon. Although it is clearly in her posted genealogy, apparently I am the only one to ever find it. Hit that page and go forward and back to make the link. I Google searched on it and nothing came up. Why? Could be because the de Leons are now admitted to be Jewish in many lines. See the other conquistador, Pedro Cizia de Leon, now admitted to be Jewish. His ancestry is scrubbed, but they deny he was related to Ponce. I smell more misdirection, however. Cizia just means church, being a Spanish spelling of the Italian Chiesa. Why would Pedro be named Church of Leon? There are two Cieza towns in Spain, and neither is in Leon. My guess is Pedro's name was changed to scrub his link to Ponce de Leon. In support of that, we find the Ponce de Leons are from Villagarcia de la Torre. Pedro Cieza de Leon was from Lerena. The distance from one place to another is about 3 miles. Regarding this question, it is also worth mentioning Daniel de Leon, who we saw in my paper on Eugene Debs. He was a Marxist and one of the founders of American socialism. He is admitted to be Jewish, so he is probably related to the Perons through Eva's maternal ancestors. This is why they don't mention that Eva is descended from the Ponce de Leons. Anyway, this could be why Madonna played Evita. You may think Madonna is Italian, but think again. She was married to Sean Penn, grandson of Rabbi Moshe Daniel Pennon. After that, married to Guy Ritchie, whose home now has mikveh, a bath used by Jewish women for ritual cleansing. I'll give you a hint. That has nothing to do with Kabbalah. Kabbalah isn't about mikveh. Gentiles who get into Kabbalah don't install mikvahs in their houses. Besides, the article at that link is from 2013 and Ritchie split from Madonna in 2008, so he didn't do it for her. I'll give you another hint. Ritchie also comes from Stewart's, which indicates the Ritchie name was changed from Rich. Guy Ritchie probably descends from Richard Rich and that lot. He probably has ancestors or current cousins in the peerage. Here is Madonna's father. Italian? I don't think so. But back to Rudolf Hess. We saw the name Munch in his genealogy. Also probably Jewish. It is admitted, for instance, that most of the patrons of painter Edvard Munch were Jewish and that he was descended from the painter Jacob Munch and historian Peter Andreas Munch. A search on Jacob Munch's genealogy of 1776 shows us that his mother was a Crefting and his wife a Barclay. His maternal grandmother was an Arbian. He is also descended from Felbers, which is a variant of Ferber. The Felbers were related to the Helmicks. all those names are Jewish, but perhaps the biggest red flag there is the name Barclay, which obviously isn't Norwegian. We have looked at Barclay's bank before, which was both Quaker and Jewish. The Quaker name hiding the Jewish roots. See my paper on the Quakers. The Barclays were big into the slave trade in Jamaica, which links us to others in this paper. Here is an engraving of David Barclay. That's not really an English nose, is it? I doubt he got it from Norway either. Okay, let's move on to Goebbels. Are we there yet? Can I quit? I am feeling a little nauseous. I like these guys better as evil Nazis than as gay Jewish actors. At least then there was something solid. To get us started on this one, I send you to this 2016 article at The Guardian. Goebbels' 105-year-old secretary leads the interview with this, quote, "The only thing you can say about Goebbels is that he was an outstanding actor," end quote. They post a video of her and that quote is used as the subtitle. Wow, I recommend you read that several times and note the precise wording. She doesn't say that one thing you can say about him is that. She says the only thing. She also says he'd trip up the steps like a little duke, and he probably had a manicure every day. Later, speaking of his performance at Berlin's Sportpalast in 1943, she says, quote, "No actor could have been any better at transformation from a civilized, serious person into a ranting, rowdy man," end quote. So she is sure to tell you twice in this short interview he is an actor. She also confirms he had a limp. I think we will need to check the footage for that one. Was it a limp or a sachet? There's another clue on that page at The Guardian. Notice at the bottom we have 4 more on this story links. The last one is an article by Roy Greenslade entitled How Wartime Britons Were Easily Swayed by the Propagandists. Were they indeed? Sort of like now. Okay, now for the genealogy. The first thing we find is that Goebbels' wife's birth name was Richkel. I'll give you a second to see what I saw.
Did you see it? Remember Guy Ritchie? Coincidence, right? I'll bet you dimes to donuts it isn't. My guess is that they are both related to the rich family in the British peerage. They have scrubbed everything around this question, as you can imagine, so it would take a lot of work to prove. Oscar Ritchell is a ghost, which makes it hard. But we do find an Oscar Ritchell merchant who came to the US in 1891. Even better, we find a Ritchell on this page for the Frankel family. Other surnames on the page include Meyer Halvey, Sklosh, Guggenheim, Fischl, Brandius, Well, Goldmark, Wies, Wolf, Spiro, and Dembitz. This takes us to the leading rabbis of Prague in the 17th and 18th centuries, some of whom were named Ritchell. But it almost doesn't matter because Wikipedia now admits Magda Goebbels was adopted by her stepfather Richard Friedlander, who was a Jewish leather goods magnate. As of this year, they also admit this. In 2016, it has been reported that Friedlander may be Magda's biological father. Friedlander's residency card found in Berlin archives stated that Magda was his biological daughter. The card was discovered by author Oliver Hilms. Wow, so either way, Magda's dad was Jewish. Why the recent change in the story? Probably because someone suggested it was better to let the name Friedlander take the fall than the name Ritchell. They wanted to prevent someone from doing what I just did, tying the Ritchells to rabbis in Prague and through them to the riches of England.
What about Magda's mother? She is given as Beirend, but no parents are listed. Also Jewish. See Isaac Benrend Lehman, a famous Jewish banker who worked for the court of Augustus the Strong, II of Saxony. he was also Hal Levi. See also Jean Beyrand, Jewish pianist, a protege of Joseph Hoffmann. Also see General Hermann Heinrich Beyrand of the Wehrmacht in World War II, not admitted to be Jewish, of course, but we know better. His wiki page is very curious, since although he was a lieutenant during World War I and a major general in World War II, his career section only mentions World War I. Also, Genevieve Beyrand, another obvious spook. Nothing is known of her early life or her parentage, although she lived until 1960. I guess her records were destroyed in the San Francisco earthquake or in a fire set off by a flash grenade. She started out as a protege of Mary Baker Eddy, always a red flag. She then switched to Abdul Baha and the Baha'i faith. Another big fake, but at least it links her to Israel. That still wasn't spooky enough for her, so she switched to Thomas Troward and Mystic Christianity. He inspired the 2006 movie The Secret, which is damnation enough for any researcher. Frederick Jacob Beyrand, not admitted to be Jewish at Wiki, but linked to the Jewish Encyclopedia, where he has a listing. Just so you know, the Jewish Encyclopedia is a descriptive record of the Jewish people. Also, photographer Katerina Beyrand, admitted to be Jewish here. So basically, every person listed on the Wikipedia page for Beyrand.
It is also worth recalling that in my recent paper on Mark Twain, we found that Magna Goebbels' half-sister was a woman named Ariane Tebenhohans, who came to America and married a spook named Sam Shepard. She was the daughter of a wealthy industrialist from Dusseldorf. Who was he? None other than Oscar Rischel. So her maiden name was not Tebenhohans. That must have been her first husband. Regardless, Ariane is admitted to be very wealthy at that last link, which of course means Magna Goebbels was too.
So we may assume Goebbels married her for her money, or already had a lot, and probably both. But of course, that conflicts with the given bio, which tells us Goebbels' dad, Fritz, was a factory clerk. How did the son of a factory clerk with 5 siblings afford to go to university for 6 years and then marry a wealthy debutante? He married her in 1930 and had done nothing up to that time but work for the Nazis. You don't get rich editing newspapers and giving free speeches for the Workers' Party. She didn't marry him for his looks. She also wasn't for his power. In 1928, NSDAP polled about 2.5% of the vote, sort of like the Green Party now. Do you think officials in the Green Party currently draw beautiful, wealthy debutantes to their gatherings? I would say no. I can tell you by experience they don't. You will tell me he married her after the elections of 1930. But they met and got engaged before the elections, so the success in those elections couldn't have influenced her. As more proof of that, notice that on Goebbels' wiki page they call her Magna Quant. That's pretty strange. Since she was divorced, her name wasn't legally Quant anymore. That was her ex-husband's name. But they shouldn't have given us that name either, because it means we can find Ariane's first husband Quant. Assuming she was a super wealthy deb, we should look for a rich guy born before 1900. That would be Gunther Quant, born 1881, whose father Emil Quant married the daughter of a textile millionaire and took over the company. So Gunther was 20 years older than Magna. The Quants supplied the German army with uniforms during World War I. By that time, the Quants were one of the richest families in Germany. Their descendants still made up 8 of the richest 100 Germans. And indeed, we find Magna Goebbels on his page, so my guess was right. His son Herbert became head of AFA, the battery company, which in 1890 was part of Dutch Bank conglomerate with Siemens AG and AEG. A 2011 report concluded the Quants were linked inseparably with the crimes of the Nazis. But we now know that requires a further twist to read it right. What is the twist? Before we go any further, I want to be sure you understand what we just uncovered. Joseph Goebbels married Magda Quandt in 1930, when she was 29 and he was 33. Her previous husband was a billionaire, one of the 5 richest men in Germany, and he was heavily tied to many military contracts. One of his 3 sons was hers, Harold Quandt, so she remained tied to that family after the divorce. And yet we are supposed to believe Joseph Goebbels was an editor and speaker for a workers' party? This billionaire's ex-wife just happened to marry an up-and-coming speaker in the workers' party? Do I need to remind you that workers were the political enemy of the billionaires? The Quandts are known to have used slave labor in their factories. See the 2007 German documentary Silence of the Quandts, shown on German public television station ARD. So the Quandts would not have supported the planks of a workers' party, would they? I have shown you much evidence in previous papers of the billionaires infiltrating and blowing workers' parties back to the early 1800s. That is what Marxism was about, and that is what American socialism was about. Most times they simply manufactured fake workers' parties as misdirection, and that is what we are seeing here again. NSDAP was built from the ground up by agents of the billionaires. Like Hitler, Goebbels is a very obvious agent, and I doubt that he was even married to Magda Quandt. The whole thing now looks like theater, as Goebbels' 105-year-old secretary tried to tell us. Magda was playing a part just as much as Joseph, and the children were likely plants as well. So let's return to the final twist on the Quandts. We just saw the Quandt money came out of textiles. For more, we have to go to the Quandt genealogy. The woman Emil married was a Draeger. His son married an Ewald. His grandson married a Brune and Brobald. Other names in that family include Clatton and Wolf. Another grandson married a Bandekow. Their children have these surnames: Geller, Rosenblatt, Halderman, and Mays Thies. Brune is of course just a variation of Braun, which links us back to Eva Braun. Despite several Bruns being assigned to play anti-Semites in the run-up to the wars, for example Wilhelm Brune, we may assume they were just controlling the opposition. To see how the Bruns really fit into this, go to this page at yadvashem.org on Maria Helena Friedlander. There we are told that Paul Citrion was friends with Henry Friedlander, also Jewish, and that his wife was Maria Helena Brune. She pretended to be a Nazi, and they still pretend she was a Gentile. She later emigrated to Israel with her husband. Are we given any evidence she wasn't Jewish? No. Does she have a genealogy or bio posted? No. Also remember that Rudolf Noraviv's lover was Eric Brune, said to be Danish, but his mother was an Evers. That is often Jewish, a variation of Ebers. See Raphael Evers, rabbi of Rotterdam. That family was also prominent in Amsterdam for centuries, as you see here.
What about the name Ewald? Also Jewish. See Heinrich Ewald, son of a linen weaver. Wiki doesn't admit he was Jewish, but the Jewish Encyclopedia pretty much does. Also see their listings for Ferdinand Christopher Ewald, who worked for the London Jew Society and founded the Wanderers' Home for Jews, and Johann Ludwig Ewald, German advocate of the Jews. Also H.A.G. Ewald, who wrote A History of Israel.
What about the Quandt name itself? Where does that come from? The lines are scrubbed, but it is probably a respelling or variation of Kant. The philosopher Immanuel Kant was from Russia, and his mother was a Reuter. His genealogy is scrubbed. They used to claim his father was from Scotland, but Wikipedia doesn't even bother trying to sell you that hooey anymore. They admit there is no evidence of it, which means the centuries-old claim is a big red flag. But we do get 2 big clues with Kant. 1. He knew Hebrew early on and changed his name from Emmanuel to Emmanuel, blowing somewhat his parents' effort to hide his roots. 2. The name Reuter, which is Jewish. See Paul Reuter, founder of Reuter's News Science. Although as it is admitted his father was a rabbi, they tell us his mother was a Betty Sanders, a Gentile. Unlikely.
Reuter was born Israel Beer Josephat, which of course links him to opera composer Giacomo Meyerbeer, originally Beer. I will be told Josephat changed his name to Reuter, which doesn't necessarily link him to Kant, which is true, but it is curious a Jew would allegedly convert and then change his name to another Jewish name.
I suspect it was his mother's name. Genie.com neither confirms nor denies that, since it gives his mother's maiden name as both Ruther and Sibyl. It is impossible to tell what they are telling us there. To discover who the Reuters really were, we have to go back before that, to Kant's time. The Reuters were Ruthers, related to the Akers. Many Akers and Akermans are Jewish. See novelist Kathy Aker. I will be told she was born Lehman, but her husband Aker was also Jewish. The Lyman name links her to banker Isaac Behrend Lehman above. She was a protege of William S. Burroughs and the Black Mountain College Spooks, which tells you all you need to know about her. Well, it also helps to know she was born in 1947. Who else? For a general slam dunk, you can visit this page, which lists the acres of eastern Poland. In the front page sampling, all are Jewish. For more on Ruther, see Walter P. Ruther, Union leader not admitted to be Jewish, but Jewish. Just type in Ruther Jewish and see all the links he has to Israel, Jewish libraries, and so on. This ties in strongly to our current research, since although he became head of the UAW, Ruther was a communist at least until 1939, when he was told to switch gears a bit. He came at the founding of the UAW in 1935, becoming its president almost immediately. For this reason, we can assume he was doing the same thing that Debs had done before him and that Goebbels would do in the same years: infiltrate the labor movement at the behest of the billionaires and blow it from the inside. But I will have to hit Ruther's in a separate paper. He would swamp this one. So anyway, the point of all this was to show the Quants were also Jewish, related to the crypto-Jewish Kants before them. I may have more to say about Kant another time as well. What about Goebbels himself? He is scrubbed past his father on the paternal side, which is a red flag. His mother was an Odenhausen, and his grandmother was a Korver. Here, we find the Odenhausens related to the Kosmans, Hoffmans, and Apels, all Jewish names. How do I know? Because this is a page for the Holocaust records from Czechoslovakia.
Searching on Korver, we find an article in the 1976 American Jewish History Quarterly on Neiman Marcus by author Don Korver. We find an Anna Korver at jweekly.com in 2011 getting bar mitzvahed, and so on. In a previous paper on Lenin, I found that Goebbels was an early protege of Max Freiherr von Waldberg, an admitted Jew who was his teacher in Heidelberg in 1920. They also admit Goebbels was a protege of another teacher, Friedrich Gundolf, also Jewish. Waldberg recommended Wilhelm von Schutz as the subject for Goebbels' PhD thesis, and he went that way. Since Schutz is another composer, that fits in with one of the themes here. This person is scrubbed at all genealogical sites in Wikipedia. But German Wiki tells us his father was a Jacob Schutz, raised to the aristocracy in 1803. This is the same name as a family of painters at the time. What you may not know is that the name was originally Schutzjude, meaning protected Jew. It was later shortened to Schutz, which means protected. It is a common Jewish name to this day. See Israeli writer David Schutz. Also, American poet Suzanne Polis Schutz, admitted to be Jewish. Also, physicist Bernard Schutz. probably Jewish since another Bernard Schutz is on the wall at the Holocaust Museum. We find the obit of another Bernard Schutz here at shalom2.com. We find a Joseph Schutz listed here in the Polish ghetto in Krakow. And here we find a Mrs. L. Schutz at the Advocate, America's Jewish Journal, sandwiched in between a Schiff and a Shabbat. Then we have the writer Friedrich Schutz, grandfather of physicist Wolfgang Pauli. This Schutz is listed in Wenninger's Great Jewish National Biography. Pauli himself said he was 3/4 Jewish. See also Alfred Schutz, banker and philosopher who worked with Husserl. I think you can see now why Goebbels wrote his dissertation on Schutz. In those years, we are told Goebbels was in love with a Jewish girl named Elsa Jank, but that just means she was his beard in college.
All this is another big problem for the given storytellers, since Goebbels was allegedly already writing anti-Semitic things in these early years, and yet he had no problem with Waldberg, Gundolf, or Junk. Strange. I suggest to you those early writings were faked later to fit the story.
I have destroyed Goebbels, so let's move on to the last big name I will hit here, Heinrich Himmler. His maternal grandfather was Franz Alois Hader, so we have that name again. These grandparents are a Wall, but we are told the grandmother was a Hofrichter. So we are supposed to believe that the mother of this famous person didn't know who her grandparents were. His paternal grandmother is given as a Kine, otherwise scrubbed. That is probably a fudge of Klein. However, we do find his great-grandfather was a Hettinger, not a Himmler. So once again, we have a famous Nazi hiding behind a fake name. It looks like the name Himmler comes from his paternal great-grandmother, but why would that be? Wikipedia has nothing to say about this oddity.
Addendum, January 25th, 2017. Why does that matter? Because it means Himmler should be a Hettinger. They are hiding that for this reason. The Ketchup King was H.J. Heinz, as you may know. They admit Donald Trump is related to him fairly closely. A Heinz in his line married a Trump just a few generations back. At about the same time in the Heinz genealogy, we come to a Johann George Heinz. He married Anna Henninger, daughter of Nicholas Henninger. Could they be the same family? If they are, then I will have linked Trump and Heinz to Himmler. In fact, they are linked as we find at these pages for the Oberst family. Those pages are worth studying since we find links to many curious surnames including Lanza. Remember Adam Lanza? We also find Schicks, Ackermans, Gorings, Hammers, Kaisers, Rudolphs, Zimmermans, Breiks, Jungs, Barths, Myers, Webers, Vaughans, Brauns, Vogels, Fields, Hoffmans, and Mullers.
But the first sign of Henninger we get is when Elizabeth Oberst marries Johann Henninger in 1825 in Unterwischheim, Baden. Both are of that town. In 1849, Susanna Oberst marries Jacob Hettinger of Unterwischheim, Baden. In 1851, Michael Oberst marries Katharina Henninger again in Unterwischheim, Baden. In the 1920s, an Olga Obrist marries an Edward Hettinger. I suspect these are all variants of the same name, but even if they aren't, we have just linked the Henningers and Hettingers through the Obersts. They are from the same town in the same years and are linked to all these obviously Jewish families. To salt that in, we also get the Gorings and Brauns and Hoffmans. Also the Schicks. Hitler's grandmother was a Schickelgruber, remember? So not only have we just linked Trump and Heinz to Himmler, we have linked Himmler to Goring, Braun, and Hitler. It looks like they were all cousins.
We will be told I have linked some Henningers and Hettingers, but we have no evidence they are the same people. But we do.
We just found the Henningers in the Oberst genealogy living in Unterwischheim, Baden.
There, they were related to the Müllers. Well, if we go to Hein's genealogy, we find his Henninger was from Kallstadt. Guess what? Kallstadt is in Baden.
Not only that, but it is about 20 miles from Unterwischheim.
Both are near Heidelberg, one being about 10 miles northwest and one being about 10 miles south. For more, we find Anna Henninger was the wife of Johann Georg Heinz I. His son, Johann Georg Heinz II, was married to Anna Müller. We find the same with Himmler's Henninger family, which was also from Baden. On Himmler's pages, the Henningers fail, but we can search on Johann Henninger for more. At these pages, we find them in Bolfsheim in those years, about 20 miles east of Heidelberg. And we get other huge red flags when no one bothers to follow up. Himmler was named Heinrich for his godfather, Prince Heinrich of Bavaria. At Christmas, the Himmlers regularly received a visit from the prince and his mother. I'm sorry, am I the first person to ever study history? Has no one ever read these sentences for sense before I got here? Does this guy seem like a logical godfather for the official of a workers' party? Hello? Is anyone home? By the way, the link for that quote is to Longrich, page 15. Himmler was in a fencing fraternity in college, and its leaders and many members were Jewish. Although we are told he was already anti-Semitic, this didn't seem to bother him. Strange. We are told Himmler tried to pursue a military career in college, but was not successful. With the prince and his mother as personal friends, how believable is that? He joined NSDAP at age 22. That's taken straight from Himmler's wiki page. It is supposed to be a young Himmler in early SS uniform. But it is an obvious fake. Compare the blacks in his shadows to the blacks in the background. Not even close. The shadow analysis destroys this photo in about 3 seconds. And is he supposed to have a beard there, or what is going on? I wasn't aware the German army allowed beards. Regardless, his lapels tell us he is already a brigadier general. Doesn't look like a brigadier general to me since he is out of his coat. Do military men actually buy this, or are they ordered to play along all over the world? Most of the photos of Himmler are poorly faked. Just awful. On the first, notice the line where his neck meets his collar. It's an obvious paste-up. On the second, notice how wide his neck is. Compare it to the other pictures of him. He never had a neck that wide. He was not an athlete. He was a gay actor. Also note the lapel insignias, which look added to both photos. Study them on all posted photos of Himmler. They always look fake. These two, posted together, make the fake very obvious. In the first, his neck is rather short. In the second, his neck is extremely long. He has gained about 3 inches of collar clearance. That's a really bad paste job. I recommend you use that clue to study all the photos of Himmler online. In the set, his neck goes from short to very long and from wide to narrow, despite no great weight gains or losses. That's another paste job. 2 things to look for at first. 1. The hat brim shadows don't match. His friend's brim is casting a dark and sharp shadow about 1 inch wide, while his is casting a dim shadow about half as wide. 2. The face edges don't match. Himmler's face is fairly sharp, where it meets the background, while his friend's is blurrier. And notice how his friend's chin isn't casting any sensible shadow down onto his collar. Finally, notice how Russian Jewish he looked when he was young and thin. That's another ridiculous fake. Why are their uniforms 3 different shades of dark? Did the Brigadier General to your right, Kaltenbrunner, wash his uniform in too much Clorox, or does the sun only shine on him? And the positions of the lapel pins doesn't match either. Kaltenbrunner has his pinned to the right, while Himmler has his pinned to the left. I see 3 different pocket pins too. The Nazi theater department seems a bit sloppy. Someone seems to have recognized this problem because we also find this. You see what they did there? They had someone Photoshop it, cropping it and equalizing the contrast so that their uniforms match. Unfortunately, doing that led to a further problem. Look at the background. It is now very obvious the background is fake. Oh my gosh, that looks so ridiculous. Himmler was involved in the beer hall push hoax, which I have already deconstructed. It makes no sense on any level, as you can see there. Honestly, after that, the rest of his bio isn't even worth reading or analyzing. It is fiction from the first word. It is more useful to return to his genealogy, so let's return to Himmler's father for a moment. His full name given as Johann Conrad Clemens Matthias Himmler. Reminds us of Samuel Clemens, doesn't it? So where did Himmler get that name? We aren't told. The lines end soon after that at Genie, and we get no other clues. But this might tell us why Mark Twain was in Heidelberg and Europe so much before the First World War, supposedly working as a reporter. We also find some interesting information here, where Himmler's great-niece is interviewed in 2007 by a Buckinghamshire newspaper, the Northern Echo. There, it is admitted that she is the wife of an Israeli Jew. Pretty curious by itself. We are supposed to believe this family turned 180 degrees in one generation? Unlikely. At the end of the article, we find this Katrin Himmler has written a book, The Himmler Brothers, published by Fisher in Germany and Macmillan in the UK. We can be sure it is misdirection. Why? To start with, she won't name her husband. She implies this is for his protection, but that is ridiculous. I assume she is hiding his name because it would blow the whole story. Addendum, January 28, 2017. A reader from Germany sent me a link today that is gold in support of the above paragraph. It is a 2008 article from The Guardian in London. It is the curious tale of how the sons and daughters of top Nazis converted to Judaism and moved to Israel. No, curious is a vast understatement. I encourage you to read it closely. Because unspun, it acts as clear proof of everything I have told you above. The first interview is with Rabbi Aharon Shir Yashuv, whose father was a Nazi in the Waffen-SS. I reread the article several times to see if he had changed his name, but nothing is there in answer to that. So it begs the question, what was his German name? Did he even have one? It is a very important part of his story denied to us. All the other names of those interviewed are also denied to us, which is convenient for the story. With the rest, we don't even get Israeli names. Nothing. So we can't do a search on them to confirm their stories. But just ask yourself this, do we have any indication this whole story isn't spun away from the far more likely truth that being that these people, though real children of Nazis, were always Jewish, and that their parents were too? That would explain this phenomenon immediately, wouldn't it? Without the need to interview psychologists and make up a whole new clinical category for it. Have you ever heard of Occam's razor? It is the default position that most things should be explained in the simplest way possible. Given two theories, always go with the simplest one unless you have a very strong reason not to. The odds will always be heavily in your favor. Given that, I think you can see how bold the storytellers are. I think we could call it reckless, were it not for the fact that it seems to work brilliantly. These writers, for The Guardian, put the truth right in front of your face and then spin you off it. The liars have become so confident from past successes, they know they can wave the truth right in front of your face, then remove it and continue to lie. you will go on as before, burying the truth for them because it doesn't suit the larger story they have trapped you in. And they don't just tell you what they have done in the past, they tell you what the future will be too. The rabbi tells us Germany is being wiped off the map by its low birth rate, and he exults in it. But that reminds us that to be wiped off the map in such a situation, the country in question has to allow unchecked immigration. I guess you are aware that what is going on in Germany and other parts of Europe. Right now, and less so in the US, the borders have been opened expressly to allow this influx. The European people can't understand why their leaders are allowing it, but the rabbi just told them why. In previous papers, we have seen the top Jewish families warring with the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. In the 20th century, they won the last stages of that war. In the 21st century, we are seeing the mop-up. Some still don't understand what these Jews have against Germany, or why I said this is happening less so in the US. It is because these families have no grudge against the US. As we have seen, they have owned us from the beginning. Israel isn't the primary Zion, the US is. Israel is just an outpost. In these new articles, they tell us Jews hate Germans for recent crimes, but we know that isn't true. They have been warring against Germany for centuries, so the grudge is very old. This war has been going on for 1,000 years or more. The rabbi and the writers for The Guardian obviously consider the war won. We are thoroughly subjugated and can now just be toyed with. That is what is happening when the author says again and again something seems to be missing from this story. He is mirroring back to you your own unease and disbelief, which he knows you will be feeling. But he is so sure he can control it, he can tell what he is doing while he does it. He even says this, quote, "They talk about despising the Trinity and the terrible things that the Germans did to the Jews, but it seems like they are talking a genocide that doesn't exist even in their memories," end quote. All I can say is wow. It takes some balls to put that in your article. The new writers don't just put the truth in front of your face, they put it halfway down your throat, almost to your stomach, before they pull it back out. But I can prove this story in The Guardian is false. I can do that because I can do math. The last interview is with a guy claiming his step-grandfather was Hans Hitler, son of Alois Jr. He says in the interview that when his mother came home after the Allied victory, he was denounced a Nazi and her flat was seized. That would have been 1945, right? If she had a flat, that indicates she was not a child, so we can assume she was born sometime before 1925. Her grandfather was Alois Jr., born 1882. We know from his bio above that he returned to Austria from Liverpool in 1914, at which time he took a second wife. If we assume that is where this Hans came from, then Hans couldn't have been born before 1914. If we search on Hans Hitler, we find nothing. But there is a Heinz Hitler, born in 1920. He can't be the father of this woman unless he had her when he was about 5 years old. Even if we go back to 1914 and insert another son, Hans, in here, it still doesn't work because that only makes Hans 11 years old. We would have to go back before Alois went to England and married the Dowling woman. Unfortunately, there are no records of a child, legitimate or not, in that period. If The Guardian wishes to rewrite history, it should present some evidence beyond the word of this unnamed man in Israel. One more thing I found in this research, in a related article from 2013 at the Jewish magazine Aish.com, we get an update learning that Hans Hitler's wife was allegedly Erna Patra Hitler.
We also learned she changed her name after the war to Heiler.
Sort of corroborates my guess above, doesn't it? But it gets even better. In an article from the same year in Die Zeit, on the same guy, it says that Erna actually changed her name to Hiller. Addendum, February 16th, 2017. More confirmation of the above analysis has been sent in by my guest writer Josh from Israel. He has discovered that the Israeli man above claiming to be a step relation of Hitler is Michael Mack of Tel Aviv University. Problem is, Josh only found this page at Wikitree indicating Hans Hitler was really Johannes Theodor Hans Hitler, born 1906. Hans was just a nickname, so why didn't they give us the real name to start with? Well, it could be because this Hans Hitler is not the son of Alois at all. He is listed as the son of Johann and Maria. And who are they? Is Johann supposed to be another brother of Adolf Hitler? If so, he is not listed in the current tree at Wikipedia. Of course, neither is Hans or Johannes. The only Johann listed as the grandfather of Adolf, in that Johann also married a Maria. So it looks like we are being led on another wild goose chase through make-believe relatives and recycled names. We also have make-believe photos. Josh found that at Pinterest. It is tagged as Hans and Erna with Alois and Hedwig. But although I confirm the third person matches the picture given as Alois Jr. above, just older, I confirm nothing else. The picture is an obvious paste-up, with inside jokes included. Notice the first two people are mysteriously larger than the second two, although they are standing next to each other. And I don't mean that they are taller or fatter, I mean that they are not properly scaled. We have a perspective problem here, since the first two seem, at first glance, to be forward of the second two. Because closer, they would be a few percentage points larger overall. But if you look again, you see that Erna is supposed to be joining the two men in a line, so there should be no perspective involved. Hans is simply too big for the photo, and so is Erna's head, which leads you to study Hans' edges. Look where his coat meets the background. It's an obvious paste, and realizing that takes us back to Erna's big head. To start with, notice how her shadows are darker than everyone else's. Everyone is shadowed to your left, but Erna has a dark line down her left side. Why? Because that head was pasted in. And once you realize that, you can look even more closely. You may think that is just a really homely woman, but it isn't. It is a man. That is what is meant by jokes included. Don't believe me? Maybe this will help. Her head obviously has more contrast than his head. Otherwise, his left edge would match the darkness of hers, and blown up, it is even easier to tell that is a man. That is a huge head with a massive jaw. That is way beyond homely. Study the way the head goes into the neck on the right side. Stare at it for a bit and you can start to see how the head was pasted in there. That's probably why we get it blurry. Without the blur, it would be even easier to tell it was a paste-up. Although Josh included that photo in his email, I searched on it myself to see if I could find a better version. I couldn't, but I did find this. That is supposed to be Hitler at the Schönmann wedding in 1937. Can you believe they still publish that? It's an obvious paste-up. Hitler is just floating in there as if some grade schooler pasted him in with Elmer's glue, and he isn't even the worst. Look at the older blonde-haired lady fifth from your left. Now look for her shadow. She isn't casting one, is she? The flash in this photo was positioned slightly to the left, since the shadows we can see are on the right. Everyone who is really there should be casting a shadow in the same direction, but although the guy behind is in bright white where her shadow should be, there isn't one. That means either he was pasted in or she was. My guess is he was, and he is covering what is her shadow. He is tagged as Dr. Morell, which must be Theodor Morell, Hitler's physician. They pasted him to confirm Hitler's presence, I guess. Need more? Can't see that Hitler is pasted in? Okay, try this. The flash is from the front left, as we have established, so why does Hitler have a dark line down the left side of his face? Note especially the dark spot where his chin on the left meets his collar. No one else has that, do they? Not even the guy right behind him. Still not enough? How about the outline of his coat to your left? Study the line from collar to shoulder and down the sleeve. Too perfect, isn't it? The shoulder is way too sharp and the line of the sleeve was cut with one long snip of the scissors. Still not enough? How old is Hitler there? This is August 1937, so he should be 48. Does he look 48? No, he looks about 35, which leads us to look again at Dr. Morell. Morell was only 3 years older than Hitler, so he should be 51 there. Does he look 3 years older than Hitler in that photo? Again, no. Morell looks about 50, but he looks about 15 years older than Hitler or more. Still not enough? Was Hitler that skinny at age 48? Not according to other fake photographic evidence. The man they have pasted in there is very svelte, with a small waist and small torso. He is also small overall. Although he is the tallest man in the photo, he is barely taller than the women around him. Those who paste up these photos don't seem to realize that men are bigger than women, not only in height, but in head size. We saw the same problem in faked photos of the Kennedy family where Joe Jr. was always pasted in too small. These photos were faked to fool people who have never studied photos or closely studied human anatomy. Still not enough? Well, let me take the photo into Photoshop, just changing the saturation levels a bit. All I have done is change the contrast and saturation of the entire photo. I have not done anything to Hitler separately. See how flat he looks? The blacks in his tux have no variation. He looks like a cardboard cutout, doesn't he? That's because he is. Also notice how some people are turning purple and some aren't. This is another indication of who was there and who wasn't. Here's another horrible paste up from the same page at fold3.com. Terrible resolution, but an obvious fake at any resolution. Just study the women to his left and right. While the face of one is high contrast, the face of the other is low contrast. The one to your right is probably wearing white, like the one to the left, but her contrast has been lowered, while the other one has been raised. If you can cut them out of that photo, take them into Photoshop separately and match the contrast levels, the dresses would be the same color white. But here, it looks like the one on the right is wearing light gray or lilac or something. Why? Because this is supposed to be a wedding photo. It is supposed to be Gretel's wedding in 1944, so the lady on the left can't be wearing white as well, right? You don't compete with the bride on her wedding day. This proves the photo is fake without even looking at Hitler.
Addendum, March 18, 2017. My guest writer Kevin just reminded me that in his research on the Folgers, he found one of Peter's ancestors to be a Hillar/Hiller. Peter's great-grandfather Samuel Folger married a Nancy Hillar/Hiller. It was a common name in the Nantucket area at that time, and it appears to be Jewish. We find several people named Levi Hiller, Moses Hiller, Hannah Hiller, Rachel Hiller, Isaac Hiller, etc. at that time and place. That page is also useful since we find many Hillers in Holzgerlingen, Neckarkreis, Württemberg. This is interesting because Holzerlinger is about 30 miles from Unterwischheim, Baden, which we looked at earlier with Himmler/Henninger.
Another reader wrote in to point me to Hitler's signature. Strange that in almost all signatures after about 1925, Hitler takes the time to cross his F and double cross his H, but fails to cross his T, leaving us with the name Hiller. Then we come to the name of Himmler's grandmother, Hofrichter. We already did the name Riker above. Same song, second verse. They may have just fudged it in the genealogy. This indicates Himmler was closely related to Hess. What about the name Haider? It is a variation of the names Haider, which we saw above in the genealogy of Hitler. So are they admitting Hitler was related to Himmler, or just toying with us again? I assume both. Either way, Haider is another Jewish name, so they are incredibly bold. They think nothing of your intelligence. For more evidence of that, you may visit the page of Horg Haider, governor of Carinthia until 2008. We are told his father, Robert, joined NSDAP in 1929 as a 15-year-old boy. Right. Although Robert was an officer at the end of the war, he got off with no trial. Plus, according to his bio, he had already been a lieutenant by 1938. Although he fought throughout the war and was wounded several times, we are told he was never promoted, still being a lieutenant in 1945. Not believable. More likely, he was decorated many times and ended the war as at least a lieutenant colonel. Horg married a Hoffman and his sister married a Hobner. Although we are told there are strict laws against anything to do with Nazism in both Germany and Austria, for some reason we are supposed to believe this Horg Haider made a long career out of being a poorly cloaked Nazi in Austria. How could he do that? Because it is all a con. Nazism is nothing but theater, and these people like Haider are simply crypto-Jews directly related to the same families that have been pulling this con for a century. As in the US, they create two fake parties that appear to be opposed, but that are really allied fascists. They then divert your attention away from any real events with a constant stream of fiction. In fact, I have already proved my point in this paper and don't feel obligated to say much more about Himmler. If you can read everything above and not gag on all of 20th century history, you need to go dunk your head in some ice water. I am going to save more photo analysis of Hitler for another time, since my eyes need some rest. But on the way out, I will hit a couple of minor things. The deaths of all the top Nazis have always been known to be suspicious, but I haven't looked at any of the others above. Let's take a quick look at the story of Himmler's demise. After the war, he was captured. He was moved to different camps and then finally searched 2 days later while in medical custody. We are told he had a cyanide capsule hidden in his mouth, which he then swallowed. He was buried in an unmarked grave of now unknown location. Okay. None of that makes any sense. Outside the magical world of bad fiction, things don't work that way. Himmler would have been searched immediately and asked who he was immediately, not 2 days later. If he had a suicide plan as escape, he would have had put it into action immediately upon capture, before any search, to be absolutely sure his capsule wasn't found and taken away. Beyond that, this story of an unmarked grave is absurd. We are told they knew who he was, so why would he be buried in an unmarked grave? They have used this lame story over and over throughout history to cover these faked deaths. And for some reason, no one ever questions it. The bad guys are always buried in unmarked graves in a ditch outside the castle or in the armory or beside the gallows or thrown into a river. This is very convenient for the storyteller since all evidence has been destroyed. You can't do a DNA test on Himmler's body now, can you? In the real world, it wouldn't be done that way. This is a very bad guy, one of the top enemies, so you would want to be sure people believed your story and knew where to find his remains. You would wish to build a little evil monument, warning people in the future not to be like this bad guy. You would want there to be no doubt of his existence, capture, and death, so you would do everything possible to verify it, catalog it, and memorialize it. Instead, we are supposed to believe just the opposite. The top enemies were treated as if they didn't matter at all, buried like mongrel dogs and forgotten. As a parting bonus, I will tell you how to read one last mystery. It was never been explained where the word Nazi came from. Wikipedia tells you to this day it comes from the German pronunciation of the word national. Right, and you believe that? Given what we learned above, maybe now you can see the truth. Nazi is simply a shortening of the word Ashkenazi. For further proof of my thesis here, that all the Nazis were crypto-Jews, you may consult my newer paper on Marx's wife, where I found mainstream Jewish researchers admitting in top newspapers like the London Telegraph that around 140 top Nazi officers were Jewish, including at least 2 field marshals, 15 generals, and 23 colonels. In at least 20 cases, known Jewish officers were awarded the highest Nazi honor, the Knight's Cross. Given the current version of history, how is that possible? But it fits my thesis perfectly, doesn't it? And that is the end of Miles Mathis's research paper on Hitler's genealogy. Whoa, that is quite a lot to take in, but really, it doesn't surprise me at all. I really enjoy World War II, I enjoy history and researching Hitler and whatnot, but I have to say, a lot of the books that I've been wanting to read on Hitler, I'm not going to read because I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste my time on fake history. And Miles Mathis has brought up time and again that the occult and Satanism is a smokescreen. And although at this point it's not that I don't disagree with him on that, I do believe that these people are Satanists and that they do a lot with the occult. But what I also believe is like what Miles says is that the occult is a smokescreen for intelligence. I believe that's true in the sense that there's so many books out there on like Hitler and the occult and Himmler and the occult, but what is all of that based off of? Because these guys are actors. So they're either acting on behalf of the families that are controlling them and they really are getting into the occult and Satanism, or all of that stuff is a bunch of hoopla that is thrown out to you so that you just believe that Hitler was a Nazi and that Himmler was a Nazi. And when I say Nazi, I mean that they weren't Jewish and that they hated Jews and they were out there deep into the occult, worshiping, all this stuff. And I'm not saying that they weren't doing that, but it's hard for me to know that because I have quite a few books that I haven't read yet on Hitler and the occult and Himmler and the occult. And I just don't know if I want to waste my time on them because I don't know if it's based on real history. I'm going to go much further and deeper into Miles Mathis's works because when he presents the information, it's not hidden and it's not coming from like a book based on history that we know is false. This is all information all of us have access to, which is why I'm sticking to this stuff. So I will be reading much more on World War II. I think Miles Mathis has a couple more papers. He has a paper on Dresden, which was, he says Dresden was faked, so we'll dive into that. And then also just more general information about World War II, which has been faked. Thank you for watching. This has been quite a long one. I don't know if I'm going to break it up into multiple videos or not. I think I might just put it into all one shot and see how that goes. So if you have watched to the very end, I appreciate your attention. And I thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.